Chapter 18. Every month, I can receive an extra class 1 monster core. I can freely enter the first 5 floors of the library. Hearing Vice Principal by Un's words, Genshin couldn't help but feel strange. Could it be that every student in the academy could receive a monster core every month? Moreover, were there any restrictions on entering the academy's library? After receiving the medal, Genshin already planned to ask his big brother Changyang, who in detail when he returned. Although he had been in the academy for 3 or 4 days, 3 of those days were spent in the competition. Moreover, the first day was only half a day, so he didn't know much about the situation in the academy. After Genshin left the stage, Taita and Tianmu Bear were also stepped onto the platform to receive their awards. After everything was over, the 1,000+ students gathered below the stage gradually dispersed. Fourth brother, you are truly too amazing. You actually obtained first place in the new student competition. If this matter were to be known by father, he would definitely be very happy. On the way back to the dormitory, Changyang, who excitedly said to Genshin, his tone extremely excited. Hearing this, Genshin faintly smiled, but his mind couldn't help but think of his mother, by Yuntian, who had doted on him since he was young. If this matter were to be known by mother, I wonder how happy she would be. Genshin secretly thought in his heart. Very quickly, Changyang, who followed Genshin back to the dormitory together. Just as the dormitory door closed, Changyang, who impatiently asked, "Fourth brother, quickly let me see that class 3 monster core." Seeing that his big brother Changyang, whose face was still excited, Genshin faintly smiled. He took out the class 3 monster core from his spatial belt and directly handed it to Changyang, who stretched out his hand and took the 3rd grade monster core, turning it over and over in his hand as if he was looking at a new treasure. He clicked his tongue and praised, "Fourth brother, you're really amazing. You just arrived at the academy, and you already have a 3rd grade monster core. To think that I, your big brother, have been in the academy for a full 2 years and have only used a single 3rd grade monster core, and that was bought with money." Genshin chuckled when he heard that. "Big brother, I heard that your Saint Force has already reached the peak of 100% and you're about to break through to the Saint Realm. Take this class 3 monster core." Genshin did not place much importance on the Tier 3 magic core. Although the Tier 3 magic core could increase his cultivation speed, Genshin was confident that even without the magic core, his cultivation speed would not be slow. Changyang, who was stunned when he heard Genshin's words. He immediately returned to his senses and shoved the class 3 monster core into Genshin's hand. He said that won't do. Fourth brother worked so hard to obtain this class 3 monster core. How can I take it? Genshin faintly smiled when he saw the class 3 monster core return to his hand. He also felt some admiration for his big brother's actions. At the very least, he did not have to worry about his big brother making things difficult for him like his 3rd brother did to Changyang. Genshin shoved the class 3 monster core back into Changyang's hand and said, "Big brother, you should take this class 3 monster core." This time, Genshin truly wanted to give the class 3 monster core to Changyang. No, Changyang refused very straightforwardly. Without any hesitation, he forcefully shoved the class 3 monster core into Genshin's hand and said, "Fourth brother, keep this monster core for yourself. This is your reward for becoming the newcomer king. It has great significance. I definitely can't take it." Genshin had no choice but to take back the class 3 monster core when he saw Changyang's insistence. Afterwards, Genshin asked his big brother Changyang about some specific matters in the academy. After 6 whole hours, Changyang finally explained some of the rules of the academy and the things that Genshin did not understand in detail. This allowed Genshin to become more familiar with the Kargath Academy. First was the principal of the academy. The principal was famous in the academy for being extremely biased towards commoner students. As long as a child of a noble family bullied a commoner student, they would definitely not be able to escape punishment from the principal. As for the conflicts between noble children, the principal would turn a blind eye. As long as it did not cause too big of a commotion, he would not interfere. In the Kargath Academy, as long as one reached the strength of a great saint, one could graduate. After graduating, one could continue to stay in the academy. One could also go to the kingdom to join the army and pledge allegiance to the kingdom through the recommendation of the academy. Moreover, some students with potential would be strongly recommended by the academy and would receive generous treatment in the kingdom. In the academy, students below the Saint Realm could receive a Class 1 Monster Core for cultivation every month, while Saint Realm students who had condensed a holy weapon could receive a Class 2 Monster Core for cultivation every month. In addition to the Monster Core that was given out every month, students could also go to a forest 20 li away from the academy to hunt magical beasts for Monster Cores. Although the forest was not big, it still covered an area of several tens of kilometers. The magical beasts inside were all released by the academy. They were all low-level magical beasts. Moreover, their attack was also the lowest among all the magical beasts. It was not easy to kill them. The academy's purpose of releasing these low-level magical beasts was to train the students' combat ability and survival ability in the wild. The strongest magical beasts were only Class 2. Moreover, most of them were just wild beasts. They had not even reached the strength of Class 1 magical beasts. However, once a Class 2 magical beast or an extremely powerful magical beast appeared, the academy would send experts to kill it to avoid bringing harm to the students. The forest was divided into 3 regions. The first region was filled with beasts that hadn't even reached the strength of Class 1 magical beasts. The second region was the habitat of Class 1 magical beasts, and the third region was filled with Class 2 magical beasts. Each area was sealed by a powerful barrier set up by the dean of the academy. There was no need to worry about the magical beasts inside escaping. In the academy, there was also a library. The library was divided into 7 floors. There were a large number of books inside. The content was very rich. In addition to the introduction of the continent, there were many secret cultivation books. Students who had not reached the Saint Realm could only enter the first 2 floors of the library. Once they reached the Saint Realm and condensed a holy weapon, they would have the qualifications to enter the 3rd and 4th floors. Above the 4th floor, only great saints or some teachers had the qualifications to enter. But when Changyang, who finished telling Jianchen about some matters in the academy, it was already late at night. Afterwards, Changyang, who hurriedly left Jianchen's dormitory and ran towards his own dormitory. At the same time, on the top floor of a tall tower in the center of Kargath Academy, Vice Principal Bai En was respectfully standing in front of an office desk, and opposite him was the Dean of Kargath Academy, whom Jianchen had met before. The Dean of Kargath Academy stroked the beard on his chin. He looked at Vice Principal Bai En indifferently and said, "Bai En, you said that the newcomer king who got first place in this year's freshman tournament is a boy called Changyang Shoten." The dean's voice carried a trace of surprise. Bai En nodded and said, "Yes, Dean. I found that this Changyang Shoten is not simple. With his 8th level Saint Force, he was able to easily defeat a 9th level Saint Force freshman. And his attacks are very sharp and his speed is very fast. He seems to have a lot of battle experience, which is completely different from the strength he should have. Even Tai Ta, who was born with divine strength, was defeated by him. And he was defeated very miserably, with almost no strength to fight back." Hearing this, the dean frowned and said, "Bai En, is what you said true? Is Changyang Shoten really that powerful?" "Dean, what Bai En said is true," Bai En said with a firm tone. The dean slowly stood up from his chair and murmured, "It seems that Changyang Shoten is even more of a genius than Old Man Chang said. Without using any heavenly treasures or monster cores, he was able to reach the 8th level of Saint Force at the age of 15. Just this point alone is enough to surprise people. And now he even has a lot of battle experience. This is a bit inconceivable." The dean's voice carried a trace of surprise. Hearing the dean's murmur, Bayan's face also revealed a trace of surprise. Without using any heavenly treasures or monster cores, Bayan was able to reach 80% of Saint Force at the age of 15. Even in the entire Jesson Empire, this kind of talent could be considered a genius. Dean, it seems that Changyang Shoten's future is limitless, Bayan said with a sigh. The dean nodded and said, if he can grow up smoothly with the talent he has displayed, he will definitely become a powerhouse in the future. It seems that our Kargath Academy has finally produced a powerhouse that can stand on the Tianyuan continent. I hope that he can grow up smoothly and not die halfway. If he really becomes a powerhouse that can stand on the Tianyuan continent, then let alone our academy, even our kingdom of Jesson status on the Tianyuan continent will increase by quite a bit. Right now, the neighboring countries are becoming more and more unstable. In the next few decades, if our kingdom of Jesson doesn't produce a powerhouse, I'm afraid that we will be attacked by the neighboring countries sooner or later. Hearing this, Bayan's face gradually became serious. Although the kingdom of Jesson was only a small kingdom, it possessed a rich land that was envied by the neighboring countries. If it weren't for the 6 powerhouses in the kingdom, the neighboring countries would have invaded long ago. Bayan thought for a moment before carefully asking, Dean, then should we give Changyang Shoten Class 1 and Class 2 monster cores for free to cultivate? We should take advantage of this opportunity to establish a good relationship with him. Hearing this, the dean pondered for a moment before shaking his head and saying, that cannot be done. Although absorbing the energy within a monster core can increase one's strength quickly, it is not without its drawbacks. Right now, Changyang Shoten is still very young. We cannot let him become addicted to relying on monster cores to cultivate. Otherwise, when he reaches a higher level in the future, his foundation will be unstable and it will hinder his future achievements. At his age, he should train more and build a strong foundation for his future. Yes, Dean. Bayan knows what to do. Bayan did not dare to disobey the dean's words at all. Moreover, the dean's words made a lot of sense. Dean, what do you plan on doing with Tai Ta? Bayan continued to ask. Bring Tai Ta to me tomorrow morning. If he's willing, I'll accept him as my disciple, the dean said after some thought. Yes, Dean. After Changyang, who left, Genshin sat on his bed and pondered with his head lowered. He digested the information he had just received. Afterwards, he sat on his bed with his legs crossed and held the Class 3 monster core in his hand. He attempted to absorb the energy within the monster core to cultivate. The energy within a monster core was the essence of every magical beast. Not only was it extremely pure, but it was also extremely powerful. When Genshin began to absorb the energy from the monster core according to Changyang, whose instructions, he immediately felt an extremely pure and powerful energy radiate from the monster core. It slowly flowed into his body through his arm. Genshin controlled the energy from the monster core to circulate through his body, constantly refining it into his own energy. When the energy had been completely converted into Saint Force, he finally controlled the energy to slowly settle down in his dantian. Using a monster core to cultivate was indeed several times faster than normal cultivation. This was because, according to the normal cultivation method, the first step was to absorb the chi of heaven and earth and then slowly refine it into one's own energy. However, the speed of absorbing the chi of heaven and earth was obviously not as fast as directly absorbing the energy from a monster core. Moreover, in terms of purity, the energy from a monster core could not be compared to the energy from a monster core. After all, the energy from a monster core was the essence of a magical beast. Therefore, directly absorbing the energy from a monster core to cultivate was several times faster than normal cultivation. Therefore, in the Tianyuan continent, a monster core was extremely precious, even if it was only a Class 1 monster core. Multicolored rays of light slowly appeared from the horizon. The fiery red sun finally struggled to climb into the sky, emitting a warm and gentle sunlight. The The golden sunlight emitted a dazzling radiance that illuminated the earth. It was as if the entire ground was covered in a layer of golden carpet. At the same time, Jianchen, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with joy, and a faint smile appeared on his face. After a night of cultivation, Jianchen's harvest was extremely great. It was already comparable to several days of cultivation. Through absorbing the energy from the monster core, Jianchen's cultivation speed was actually 10 times faster than normal. He could clearly feel that the saint force in his body had strengthened by a lot. According to his estimation, he was not far away from the 9th layer of saint force. At this speed, he would be able to successfully reach the 9th layer of saint force in at most a week. Of course, this was only Jianchen's estimation. He would have to test it to know the specifics. If others knew that Jianchen's absorption of energy from the monster core was 10 times faster than normal, they would definitely be shocked. Although the monster core could greatly increase one's cultivation speed, it was far from 10 times. Under normal circumstances, ordinary people would only be able to cultivate 2 or 3 times faster with the help of the monster core. Even some powerful people would only be able to cultivate 6 or 7 times faster with the help of the monster core. However, Jianchen had not even reached the saint level yet, but his absorption of the monster core was already 10 times faster. This was definitely a very terrifying speed. Looking at the monster core in his hand, although the color of the monster core did not change at all, Jianchen could clearly feel that the monster core in his hand had shrunk. Chapter 19. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Although these 3 days weren't long, it allowed Jianchen to familiarize himself with the living environment of the academy. In these 3 days, Jianchen didn't go to the academy other than the first day of classes. He was either cultivating in his room or immersing himself in the academy's library. This was because the classes taught by the teachers in the academy were nothing more than teaching everyone how to behave, how to deal with dangerous situations, survival skills in the wild, and combat techniques. These things were completely useless to Jianchen. In his previous life, he was a veteran. With his experience, he could teach those teachers. As for the combat experience and survival skills in the wild, in Jianchen's opinion, he was completely qualified to teach those teachers in the academy. This was because the knowledge that the teachers taught about combat was very shallow and far inferior to his own. The next morning, Jianchen put on the academy's uniform. After eating breakfast in the cafeteria, he walked straight to the library. The academy wasn't strict with the students. The daily classes were completely up to one's choice. After all, some of the students who were born in noble families and wealthy families had received education from their families. The knowledge they knew wasn't necessarily worse than some of the academy's teachers. It was just that they lacked experience. Therefore, the academy's classes were mostly prepared for the commoners. There were very few noble students who went to the academy for classes. Even if there were, they were mostly some small nobles. Arriving at the first floor of the library, Jianchen took a few books and walked to a table in the reading area. He sat down and read with great interest. The library of Kargath Academy was very large. The collection of books inside was also very plentiful. It covered almost all kinds of things. It was far more abundant than the library of Changyang Prefecture. Here, Jianchen found many books that weren't available in Changyang Prefecture's library. This allowed him to understand the situation of this world better. Currently, Jianchen was holding a book that introduced the various kinds of magical beasts on the Tianyuan continent. There were many kinds of magical beasts on the Tianyuan continent. Whether it was those that ran on the ground or those that flew in the sky, there are thousands of species. Moreover, the book mentioned that there were many kinds of magical beasts on the Tianyuan continent that weren't available in the book. These magical beasts either lived in the depths of the magical beast mountain range or far away in the endless sea. These places were difficult for even the most powerful experts to set foot in. Just as Jianchen was immersed in reading, a girl around 16 or 17 years old suddenly walked in from the entrance of the library. The girl was very beautiful. She wore the uniform of the academy. Her soft long hair was tied into dozens of small ponytails that fell down her back. It added a bit of beauty to her already pretty face. However, there was always a trace of arrogance on her face. It was obvious that she was born in a noble family. This girl was Cadiculi of the Cadiculi family. Cadiculi entered the library and walked straight to the bookshelves. Her eyes casually swept over the students sitting in the reading area. However, just as her eyes passed over the back of Jianqin, who was sitting at a table and reading in his uniform, her footsteps suddenly came to a halt. Cadiculi stared closely at Jianqin's back. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. When she thought of how Jianqin grabbed her leg and threw her off the stage a few days ago, her eyes immediately filled with anger. To her, this was an unforgettable humiliation. Her white and tender little face was flushed red from excessive anger. She snorted softly and was no longer in the mood to read. She directly left the library and muttered with gritted teeth, "Changyang Shoten, humph, this time I'll definitely teach you a lesson." Right now, Jianqin's mind was completely absorbed by the contents of the book. He was very engrossed in reading and did not notice Cadiculi's arrival at all. In the academy's library, no one dared to cause trouble, so Jianqin was not on guard against his surroundings. After Cadiculi left the library, she went straight to find her second brother, Changyang-ku. At this moment, Changyang-ku was practicing alone in the forest behind the dormitory. Seeing Cadiculi's arrival, Cadiliang stopped what he was doing and smiled. "Third sister, didn't you say you were going to the library? Why are you here?" In Cadiliang's heart, he still doted on his third sister, who was not much younger than him. Cadiculi came in front of Cadiliang and said with a sullen face, "Second brother, didn't you say you were going to help me teach that Changyang Shoten a lesson?" Hearing the name Changyang Shoten, the smile on Cadiliang's face gradually disappeared. His face slowly turned gloomy. He was still brooding about the freshman competition a few days ago. With his 90% Holy Force strength, he actually lost to Changyang Shoten, who only had 80% Holy Force. Moreover, he lost in such an ugly manner, especially when Changyang Shoten kicked his butt. Cadiliang could never forget that. That kick was a great humiliation to him. Cadiculi's face was filled with anger as she said angrily, "Second brother, that Changyang Shoten is in the library right now. Should we go teach him a lesson?" "Yes, of course we should. This time I want to defeat him fair and square." "Third sister, let's go," Cadiliang said as he walked towards the library. In his heart, he refused to admit that Jianqin could defeat him. In his opinion, the reason why he had lost to Jianqin in the arena last time was because of his carelessness. Coupled with the restriction of the arena's terrain, this made the prideful Ka Di Liang extremely unconvinced. Cadiculi's face showed a trace of joy as she said, "This time second brother must teach that Changyang Shoten a lesson." Cadiculi followed closely behind Cadiliang as they walked towards the library. Although the two of them were at the 9th level of Holy Force, Cadiculi knew very well that she was definitely not a match for her second brother. If her second brother could not defeat Changyang Shoten, then she would definitely not be a match for Changyang Shoten. In the library, Jianqin was still reading the book in his hand with great interest. "Hello, may I sit here?" At this moment, a clear voice sounded in Jianqin's ear. Although Jianqin was very engrossed in the book, his spirit was very strong. The moment he heard the voice, he woke up from the book. Hearing the voice, Jianqin subconsciously raised his head to look. He saw a 17 or 18-year-old girl standing in front of him with a timid expression. The girl was wearing a student uniform, her long black hair casually draped over her shoulders, emitting a dark glow. A pair of bright eyes were curiously sizing up Jianqin, and a faint smile hung on her delicate face. The girl was very beautiful. Her skin was white and tender like a newborn baby's. Coupled with her light red cherry lips, it was simply enough to make people want to get close to her. Although she was only 17 or 18 years old, Her exquisite figure was still perfectly outlined by the small student uniform, and in the girl's arms she was holding a thick book. Jianchen casually looked at the girl, then turned his head to look around. At this time he discovered that, in the reading area, the few dozen tables were already filled with people. There was not a single empty table. Looking at the extremely beautiful girl in front of him, Jianchen said indifferently, "Sit anywhere you like." Then Jianchen's gaze fell on the book in his hands again, no longer looking at the girl in front of him, even though the girl in front of him was quite beautiful. The girl looked curiously at Jianchen, who was engrossed in reading the book, and a strange light flashed in her eyes. Then she slowly sat down and softly said, "Thank you." The girl's voice was soft and full of intelligence. Her voice was very pleasant to the ears, making people who heard it feel comfortable in their hearts. Jianchen acted as if he didn't hear her voice. He was still engrossed in reading the book in his hands, as if there was only this book in his eyes. The girl looked at Jianchen again. Her pair of bright eyes revealed a trace of curiosity, but she didn't say anything. Then she slowly placed the book in her arms on the table and slowly flipped through it. Although the girl was flipping the book, her movements were very elegant and full of nobility, as if she was born with it. The library was very quiet. Although there were many people, no one made any noise. Everyone was very focused on the book in their hands. At this moment, a man and a woman suddenly appeared at the entrance of the library. It was the brother and sister, Ka Diliang and Ka Di Chili. "Second brother, look, he's there." Ka Di Chili pointed in Jianchen's direction and said softly. Ka Diliang's gaze followed the direction of Ka Di Chili's finger and saw a slightly familiar back. Then a trace of disdain appeared at the corner of his mouth. He puffed out his chest and arrogantly walked towards Jianchen's position, while Ka Di Chili followed closely behind him. Bam! When Ka Diliang arrived in front of Jianchen's table, he directly slammed his palm on the table. Suddenly, a loud sound was heard, spreading far and wide in the quiet library. The sudden noise attracted the attention of all the students who were reading. They all shifted their gazes away from their books and landed on Jianchen's table. Aside from a few people who frowned, the rest were all waiting for a good show to unfold. Jianchen frowned and slowly raised his head. He looked straight at Ka Diliang and said in a low voice, "What are you doing?" Jianchen's voice carried a trace of anger. At this moment, even the girl sitting opposite Jianchen frowned and looked at Ka Diliang with an unhappy expression. Her face also carried a trace of anger. Just now, a loud sound suddenly rang in her ears. She had been quietly reading and had put all her attention into the book, so she was shocked. Ka Diliang looked at Jianchen with contempt and said arrogantly, "Chanyang Shoten, I, Ka Diliang, officially challenge you. Do you dare to accept?" Ka Diliang's loud voice spread throughout the first floor of the library, as if he was afraid that someone couldn't hear him. "Challenge." Jianchen's face showed a trace of disdain and snorted, "Not interested. Please leave immediately and don't disturb me from reading. I don't have that much time to waste on you." Chapter 20. Jianchen couldn't help but feel a burst of anger in his heart as he stared at Ka Diliang with disdain. Jianchen couldn't help but raise his voice. "Loser, what qualifications do you have to challenge me?" Jianchen's tone had a hint of arrogance. This was naturally cultivated in his previous life, and now it was inadvertently revealed. But when he heard Jianchen call him a loser, Ka Diliang's handsome face turned pale with anger, and his eyes flashed with a raging fire. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't dare to violate the library's rule of prohibiting all fighting, he would have already attacked. Ka Di Chili, who was standing beside Ka Diliang, also had a face full of anger. She glared at Jianchen and shouted, "Humph! You don't even dare to accept my second brother's challenge. Are you still a man?" Hearing Ka Di Chili's words, Ka Diliang's eyes lit up. He suppressed the anger in his heart and said with disdain, "That's right, Not daring to accept someone's challenge is the behavior of a coward. Changyang Shoten, I'll be waiting for you at the arena. If you admit that you're a coward, then you don't have to come. Third sister, let's go to the arena. After saying that, Ka Diliang looked at Jianchen with hatred again and turned to walk out of the library. Humph, Changyang Shoten, did you hear that? If you don't dare to come, then you're a coward. After saying that, Ka Di Chili also turned to leave. Changyang Shoten, isn't that the champion of this year's new student competition? Yeah, I heard that Changyang Shoten used only 80% of his holy force to defeat several new students who had 90% of their holy force. He's very powerful. After Ka Di Chili left, the entire library was filled with a buzzing sound of discussion. Without exception, everyone was talking about the champion of this year's new student competition, Changyang Shoten. The girl sitting opposite of Jianchen looked at Jianchen with a bit of surprise. Her pair of beautiful eyes blinked slightly, and it was easy to see the trace of surprise on her face. Jianchen slowly closed a book in his hand. At this moment, his expression was very ugly. After being disturbed by the Ka Diliang siblings, he didn't have the mood to continue reading. Moreover, the Ka Diliang siblings had already said so much, so Jianchen had no choice but to accept their challenge. Otherwise, he was afraid that the entire school would look down on him. Although Jianchen didn't care much about his reputation, he represented Changyang Prefecture behind him. Moreover, his elder brother Changyang, who was still here, if he didn't accept the challenge, then Wu Ning would bring shame to Changyang Prefecture. Even his elder brother Changyang, who couldn't avoid the ridicule of others in the academy. Jianchen slowly stood up from his chair and walked towards the bookshelf in front of him with the books in his hand. After putting the books back in their original position, he walked straight out of the library. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Jianchen. Hey, Changyang Shoten. Just when Jianchen had just walked to the entrance of the library, the girl sitting opposite of him suddenly opened her mouth. Hearing this, Jianchen subconsciously stopped his footsteps. His gaze was calm as he looked at the beautiful girl and said in an indifferent tone, "What's the matter?" Listening to Jianchen's indifferent tone, the girl was a little dissatisfied and curled her lips. However, she didn't say anything. She immediately walked in front of Jianchen and said softly, "Changyang Shoten, are you going to the arena to accept his challenge?" "Yes." Jianchen nodded slightly and said softly, "Actually, you don't have to accept this challenge. Loud noises are prohibited in the library. That person just now has already violated the rules set by the academy. You can go to the principal and report him. He will definitely be punished. In Kargath Academy, there has never been anyone who dares to go against the principal's orders," the girl said. Hearing this, Jianchen's impression of the girl immediately improved. He then chuckled and said, "Since he has already said so, then I will definitely accept this challenge." After saying this, Jianchen didn't say anything else and directly walked out of the library. The girl looked at Jianchen's disappearing figure, and her eyes flickered a few times. After a slight hesitation, she immediately ran to the table she was sitting at and placed the thick book she was reading on the bookshelf. Then she quickly walked out of the library and walked towards the arena. After the girl left, the library was silent for a while. Then, suddenly a loud voice rang out, "There's a good show to watch. A newcomer king with 80% holy force fighting a newcomer with 90% holy force. Anyone who doesn't watch would be a fool." Following the voice, a boy who looked to be about 18 years old and wearing a school uniform ran out of the library. After the two of them left, some of the students who were reading in the library also put the books in their hands back to their original places and left one after another, running towards the arena. The academy's martial arts field was built in a corner of the field. There were 5 circular arenas with a diameter of about 20 meters. However, the area of the martial arts field was not large. It could only accommodate a few hundred spectators. Otherwise, the freshman competition would not have been held in the field a few days ago in a temporary arena. When Jianchen arrived at the arena, He saw Ka Diliang standing in one of the arenas with his arms crossed in front of his chest. His face was full of arrogance. Besides Ka Dichili, there were dozens of students wearing school uniforms standing in front of the arenas and discussing animatedly. Seeing Jianchen coming from afar, Ka Diliang, who was standing in the arena, sneered and said loudly, "I thought you were a coward and didn't dare to come." Humph! Jianchen snorted with disdain and directly jumped into the arena. With his arms crossed, he stood in the arena and said coldly, "Make your move. I'll give you 10 moves. Within these 10 moves, I won't fight back." After hearing Jianchen's arrogant words, the dozens of students watching below the arena all exclaimed and began to discuss in low voices. Most of them were seniors of the academy. Among them, there were many who didn't think highly of Jianchen. They all thought that the reason why Jianchen was able to win against Ka Diliang in the arena during the freshman competition was because Ka Diliang was careless. Ka Diliang's eyes were filled with anger. Everyone could tell that Jianchen was looking down on him from what he had just said. "Changyang Shoten, you are more arrogant than I thought," Ka Diliang said in a deep voice. Jianchen looked at Ka Diliang calmly and said indifferently, "If you want to fight, then hurry up. I don't have that much time to waste with you." "Humph!" Ka Diliang snorted and said with a cold smile, "Why are you in such a hurry? When everyone is here, I will defeat you in front of everyone." Ka Diliang was still brooding about losing to Jianchen in the freshman competition, especially when Jianchen kicked his butt. To him, it was an unforgettable shame. In Ka Diliang's heart, he thought that he lost to Jianchen in the freshman competition because of his carelessness. Therefore, he wanted to use this opportunity to regain his lost face and humiliate Jianchen again. Gradually, more and more people gathered around the arena, and the number of people was still increasing. In the distance, there were still quite a few students walking towards the arena. The news of this challenge had obviously been announced by Ka Diliang. In just a short while, there were already more than 200 people gathered around the arena. Almost everyone had the mentality of watching a good show. In the crowd, Ka Diliang's elder brother, Ka Diyin, was also standing in the crowd. Beside him were several men and women who were about the same age as him. "Fourth brother, do your best. Your elder brother has high hopes for you." Suddenly, a slightly deep but very familiar voice came from below the arena. Hearing this, Jianchen turned his head and saw his elder brother, Changyang Hu, standing below the arena and looking at him with an encouraging face. Jianchen smiled and nodded to Changyang Hu without saying anything. Right at this moment, someone moved a table over and shouted, "Place your bets! Place your bets! Place your bets on whoever wins. Hurry up if you want to bet. I bet on Ka Diliang, 10 gold coins. I bet on Changyang Shoten, 20 gold coins. I bet on Ka Diliang, 50 gold coins." Gradually, the fight between Jianchen and Ka Diliang was treated as a gamble by the surrounding students. Those who were able to come here to watch during class were all people born in noble families. They didn't lack money. The bets ranged from 10 gold coins to 10 purple coins. Almost 80% of the people who participated in the bet on Ka Diliang, and only 20% on Jianchen. 10 purple coins. I bet on Changyang Shoten. Changyang, who took out 10 purple coins and placed them on the table. I also bet on Changyang Shoten, 10 purple coins. Following closely behind Changyang, who, a soft and lively voice suddenly sounded. It was actually the beautiful girl who sat across from Jianchen in the library. She was clearly born in a noble family. Her speech and behavior were full of nobility, as if she was born with it. Seeing the girl bet 10 purple coins on Changyang Shoten, many people were surprised. Changyang, who was Changyang Shoten's elder brother. It was understandable that she would bet on Changyang Shoten, but the girl's action made many people puzzled. Even so, no one said anything. In the ring, Jianchen looked at Ka Diliang with a strange expression and said, "Can we start now?" Ka Diliang's face was full of confidence. He sneered and said, Chongyang Shoten, you just said that you would let me have 10 moves first. It's not too late to regret now. A gentleman's word cannot be taken back. Bring it on. Jianchen said. Arrogant. Although Ka Diliang was very confused about the meaning of the phrase, a gentleman's word cannot be taken back, he only needed to guess to understand the general meaning. Ka Diliang didn't waste any more words, and directly rushed towards Jianchen. Since Jianchen said that he would let him have 10 moves first, he didn't have the slightest hesitation and just went all out to attack. Ka Diliang rushed in front of Jianchen and directly punched towards Jianchen. The speed of this punch was very fast and carried with it the sound of breaking air. Facing Ka Diliang's punch, Jianchen only took a small step back. When Ka Diliang's fist was about to reach his face, it stopped because of the limitation of the length of his arm. Phew, that was close. I was almost hit. This Chongyang Shoten can't only have this much strength, right? The fight has just started and he was almost hit. If he was hit by this punch, he would have been seriously injured and the winner would have been decided. This Chongyang Shoten's luck is really good. He can even dodge like this. Chapter 21. Seeing that he was so close to hitting Jianchen, Ka Diliang couldn't help but feel a little regretful. However, his hands weren't slow as he quickly kicked towards Jianchen. Very quickly, the 10 moves limit was over. During these 10 moves, Jianchen didn't fight back and easily dodged all of Ka Diliang's attacks. In the eyes of others, every time Jianchen dodged an attack from Ka Diliang, it was a close call. This made many people below the stage sweat, including Chongyang Hu. Although Ka Diliang's attacks were very fast, he couldn't even touch Jianchen's clothes during these 10 moves. This made Ka Diliang very angry. Raising his hand to block Ka Diliang's fist, Jianchen said indifferently, 10 moves have passed. Now it's time for me to fight back. As he said that, Jianchen kicked towards Ka Diliang. The speed of this kick was so fast that it was too late to dodge. Just as Ka Diliang was about to reach out to block, Jianchen's kick had already landed on Ka Diliang's chest. Thump, thump, thump. The powerful force from the kick caused Ka Diliang to stagger back a few steps before he could steady himself. When his body stabilized, Ka Diliang looked at Jianchen with a shocked expression. Jianchen clearly only had 80% of Saint Force, but the strength of this kick was beyond his imagination. He almost couldn't block it. During the last freshman competition, Ka Diliang didn't fight with Jianchen at all, so he didn't know Jianchen's exact strength. Now that he had fought, he understood that Jianchen's strength was much stronger than he had imagined, and from the powerful force from that kick, he even suspected that Jianchen's strength was more than 80% of Saint Force. Perhaps Jianchen wanted to end the battle quickly, so he didn't give Ka Diliang any time to catch his breath. He quickly rushed forward and threw a punch towards Ka Diliang's nose. Ka Diliang's expression gradually became serious. His body awkwardly dodged Jianchen's punch. Then he raised his fist and smashed it towards Jianchen's head. Jianchen revealed a cold smile. He reached out one hand to block Ka Diliang's fist, while his other hand tightly held onto Ka Diliang's arm. He then stood firmly with his feet in a horse stance. At the same time, he lowered his waist and suddenly exerted strength in his arms. He grabbed Ka Diliang's arm and flung him far away. This was the wrestling technique that Jianchen learned from the Mongols in his previous life. Although he was only proficient in swordsmanship, he had walked a long path and naturally had a wide range of knowledge. With his almost photographic memory, he naturally learned a lot. Besides swordsmanship, Jianchen also knew a lot of miscellaneous things, but he only knew a little about them. Ka Diliang's body was as light as a feather. He was easily flung out by Jianchen. He flew a distance of 4 to 5 meters in the air, and finally fell on the stage with a pang sound. Huff! Seeing that Jianchen's weak body could actually do such a thing, many of the students below the stage gasped. For a moment, everyone's gaze towards Jianchen changed. After the battle between the two, No one dared to look down on Jianchen anymore. Ka Diyin and Ka Di Chili's faces gradually became ugly. This situation was beyond their expectations. Humph, Changyang Shoten, you really do have some skills. Ka Di Yun gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. Ka Di Liang climbed up from the stage in an extremely sorry state. His face was gloomy, and his gaze towards Jianchen was filled with hatred. Ah! Ka Di Liang let out an angry roar. His ninth-layer Saint Force was completely concentrated in his palms, and then he quickly arrived in front of Jianchen. Both of his palms pressed forward at the same time, and fiercely struck towards Jianchen's chest. Jianchen sneered. The Saint Force in his body quickly condensed in his palms, and then suddenly struck out, colliding with Ka Di Liang's palms. Pum! With a muffled sound, Jianchen and Ka Di Liang's palms fiercely collided. Both of their palms separated immediately upon contact, and the strong rebound force caused both of their bodies to fly backwards at the same time. Jianchen's body was constantly twisting, and his feet were constantly crossing each other. With his skillful technique, he quickly unloaded the rebound force. Looking at Ka Di Liang, who was still constantly retreating, a sharp light flashed in Jianchen's eyes. Then his body quickly rushed forward, and then he jumped up high, and with all his strength he kicked towards Ka Di Liang, who was still constantly retreating. In a situation where he could not control his body, Ka Di Liang did not have the strength to resist at all. He was directly kicked in the chest by Jianchen, and immediately his whole body was kicked out of the stage. Puff! Falling to the ground, Ka Di Liang's face had become extremely pale, and then he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was obvious that he was not lightly injured. Second brother. Ka Di Liang and Ka Di Chili hurriedly ran to Ka Di Liang's side. Looking at Ka Di Liang's pale face and some blood at the corner of his mouth, both of their faces were filled with worry. Second brother, are you all right? Ka Di Yun asked in a deep voice, and his face had already become very ugly. This time was different from the last time. In the last competition, Ka Di Liang could be said to have lost to Jianchen due to a moment of carelessness. But this time was different. This time, Ka Di Liang had lost to Jianchen in a fair fight. Didn't this mean that Ka Di Yun, whose Saint Force had already reached the 9th layer, was not even comparable to a freshman with only 80% Saint Force? Second brother, how are you? Are you seriously injured? Ka Di Chili asked with concern, her voice filled with worry. Ka Di Liang stood up with difficulty with the help of the two. Gently shaking his head, he said, Big brother, third sister, I'm fine. I've only suffered some light injuries. Ka Di Liang's voice was somewhat weak. Seeing Ka Di Liang's pale face, Ka Di Yan's eyes were burning with anger. Raising his head, he sharply looked at Jianchen, who was standing on the stage, and said in a low voice, Third sister, you take care of second brother. I'm going to teach that arrogant brat a lesson. Saying so, Ka Di Yun directly jumped onto the stage. Big brother, you can't. Big brother, don't. Ka Di Yun and Ka Di Chili wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Seeing Ka Di Yun already on the stage, Ka Di Liang and Ka Di Chili both sighed at the same time. Regardless of whether Ka Di Yun won or lost, from now on, their Ka Di family's prestige in Kargath Academy would be greatly reduced. Originally, it was a fair duel. Even if they lost, it wouldn't be a big deal. At most, they would lose some face. But now, with Ka Di Yun's interference, the result changed. A senior student who had been in the academy for several years actually dared to bully a new student. If this matter spread out, the three siblings would inevitably be ridiculed by the academy. Jianchen's eyes indifferently looked at Ka Di Yun, who jumped onto the stage. A faint sneer appeared on his face, and he said, Do you want to avenge your second brother? Ka Di Yun fiercely stared at Jianchen. He coldly snorted and said in a deep voice, Changyang Shoten, your strength is indeed very strong. But since you injured my second brother, I will definitely not let you leave the stage unharmed." Hearing this, many of the spectators below the ring frowned, and the way they looked at Ka Diyun suddenly changed. "Ka Diyin, what do you mean? Are you bullying my Changyang prefecture because there is no one left?" As soon as Ka Diyun's voice fell, a slightly deep voice came from below the stage. Then a figure jumped onto the stage. It was Jianshin's big brother, Changyang Hu. Changyang Hu fiercely stared at Ka Diyun and angrily said, "Ka Diyun, if you want to fight, I will fight with you." Seeing that Changyang Hu was willing to stand up for him, Jianshin could not help but feel warmth in his heart. He softly said, "Big brother, you can go down. I can deal with this matter." Changyang Hu shook his head and said, "No, fourth brother, you should go down. Ka Diyun's strength has already reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. You are not his opponent. I will help you deal with him." Hearing this, Jianshin slightly hesitated. Then he slightly nodded and said, "Big brother, be careful." With that, Jianshin directly left the stage. Ka Diyun looked at Changyang Hu with disdain and sneered, "Changyang Hu, you asked for it. Don't blame me." "Humph. It's still too early for you to say that. It's not certain who will win yet," Changyang Hu coldly said. Both he and Ka Diyun were at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. If Ka Diyun had not condensed a saint weapon and become a saint, their strength would have been on par. Ka Diyun sneered. Looking at Changyang Hu, his eyes were filled with disdain. He slowly raised his right hand and a powerful golden energy fluctuation came from his right hand. It gradually condensed into a huge golden sword. The golden sword was extremely large. It was 5 feet long and as wide as a palm. From the long hilt, it seemed to be a two-handed sword. Seeing the huge sword in Ka Diyun's hand, Jianshin slightly frowned. In Changyang Hu, he had read many books about saint weapons. Naturally, he could tell that this sword was Ka Diyun's saint weapon. This was the first saint weapon Jianshin had seen since he came to this world. Although he already knew that a saint weapon was a weapon condensed from saint force, Jianshin still could not help but be surprised when he saw it with his own eyes. Although he could clearly feel that this saint weapon was completely condensed from energy, it looked like a real weapon. It did not have the slightest illusory feeling of energy. Jianshin was amazed. As soon as the huge golden sword appeared, cries of surprise rang out from below the stage. Saint weapon, he actually condensed a saint weapon. Saint, he's already become a saint. Ka Diyun has actually succeeded in condensing a saint weapon. Changyang Hu is in trouble now. Although there was only a single step between the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force to Saint, this step was very difficult to take. In Kargath Academy, most of the older students had reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force, but without exception, they were all stuck at the step of condensing a saint weapon. If one did not possess extraordinary talent, it would be very difficult to condense a saint weapon. On the Tianyuan continent, there were many people who could only remain at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force for their entire lives. They would never be able to break through to Saint Realm. From this, it could be seen just how difficult it was to successfully reach Saint Realm. Once one succeeded in becoming a saint, their strength would greatly increase. Not only would a saint weapon be their only weapon, but it would also be connected to their thoughts. Moreover, it would be able to unleash attacks far greater than their own strength. Seeing the huge golden sword in Ka Diyun's hand, Changyang Hu's face became extremely ugly. With a saint weapon, Ka Diyun's strength had undergone an earth-shattering change. He was definitely not someone who could only reach the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. Big Brother has actually succeeded in condensing a saint weapon. Below the stage, Ka Dichili looked at the saint weapon in Ka Diyun's hand in pleasant surprise. Her face was filled with excitement. Looking at the huge golden sword in Ka Diyun's hand with envy, Ka Diliang's face was also filled with joy. Ka Diliang and Ka Dichili had only just learned about Ka Diyun's breakthrough to Saint Realm. With the saint weapon in hand, Ka Dian's confidence immediately swelled to an unprecedented level. His face was filled with pride. Seeing Changyang-hu's extremely ugly expression, he felt an indescribable sense of pleasure. Ha 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 ha! Changyang-hu, are you afraid now? Kneel down and kowtow to me 3 times, then call me grandfather, and I'll let you go today. Otherwise, you know what the consequences will be. Ka Dian laughed wildly. His tone was extremely savage. Hearing this, Changyang, whose face turned ashen, he roared furiously, "You're dreaming, Ka Dian. Even if you've become a Saint Realm expert, I, Changyang-hu, am still not afraid of you." Ka Dian looked at Changyang-hu arrogantly and said disdainfully, "Changyang-hu, what are you going to use to fight me?" Changyang-hu furiously glared at Ka Dian as flames of fury burned in his eyes. "Changyang-hu, take this sword." At this moment, an iron sword was thrown from below the stage, directly flying towards Changyang-hu. Chapter 22. With a sword in hand, Changyang-hu could not help but feel more courageous. Although he knew that he was still no match for Ka Dian, who had already become a saint, he could at least put up a fight. "Changyang-hu, do you really want to fight me with an ordinary iron sword? You're dreaming. Now, I'll show you the strength of a saint." With that, Ka Dian quickly rushed towards Changyang-hu. The 2-meter-long sword in his hand seemed to be weightless in his hand. With an ear-piercing sound, it directly swept towards Changyang-hu at an extremely fast speed. Changyang-hu's face became very solemn. He quickly retreated, narrowly dodging the incoming sword. Ka Dian's 2-handed sword swept past Changyang-hu's clothes, causing a few pieces of cloth to slowly float in the air. After becoming a saint, Ka Dian's strength had undergone an earth-shaking change. It was far from what Changyang-hu, who was only at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force, could compare with. Just the first attack alone was already very dangerous for Changyang-hu. Ka Dian's movements did not stop at all after his first attack failed. He stepped forward, the powerful qi emitting from his body tightly oppressing Changyang-hu. Then he once again brandished his golden sword towards Changyang-hu. Looking at the menacing huge sword, Changyang-hu did not choose to take it head-on. The iron sword in his hand, which was made of ordinary iron, could not take on the powerful saint weapon in Ka Dian's hand. The huge sword's attack speed was very fast. Changyang-hu did not have time to think. Feeling that the huge sword was quickly closing in on his head, Changyang-hu did not hesitate at all and directly dodged it. At this moment, he did not care about his image. Boom! Just as Changyang-hu moved away, Ka Dian's huge sword had already fiercely struck the place where Changyang-hu had been standing. The powerful energy contained in the saint weapon directly left a deep crack in the arena that was completely made of hard stone. Around the crack, fine cracks spread out like a spider's web, covering a radius of 1 meter. At this moment, Changyang-hu took advantage of the opportunity when Ka Dian did not have time to withdraw his saint weapon to swing his iron sword at Ka Dian with all his strength. Humph! Ka Dian snorted disdainfully. With a wave of his hands, the golden 2-handed sword, with a brilliant golden light, arrived at an extremely fast speed and fiercely collided with Changyang-hu's iron sword. Following the crisp sound of iron weapons colliding, Changyang-hu's iron sword was sent flying far away by Ka Dian's saint weapon. The powerful recoil from the sword's hilt caused Changyang-hu's hands to rupture, and traces of blood flowed out. Immediately afterwards, Ka Dian suddenly kicked out, directly hitting Changyang-hu's chest. The powerful force directly kicked Changyang-hu's stocky body into the air, and finally sent him flying out of the arena. While his body was still in the air, a mouthful of blood sprayed out from Changyang-hu's mouth, and his face had already turned pale. "Big brother!" Jianchen's face suddenly changed. Immediately after, he stamped his feet and directly jumped up from the ground. While in the air, Jianchen quickly flew towards Changyang-hu under the astonished and disbelieving gazes of the crowd. Just as Changyang, whose body was about to fall to the ground, Jianchen finally caught him in time. Cough, cough! Landing on the ground, Changyang, who violently coughed twice, and droplets of blood shot out from his mouth. The strength of a saint was much greater than that of someone who had not yet become a saint. Even though he was at the peak of the 10th layer of saint force, this was still the case. Just this kick alone had caused Changyang, who to suffer heavy internal injuries. Big brother, are your injuries serious? Jianchen forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart as he looked at Changyang with concern. Changyang, who shook his head, his eyes were filled with anger as he stared at the complacent Kadiyun in the arena. I'm fine. I never thought that Kadiyun would actually successfully condense a saint weapon and become a saint. Big brother is no longer his opponent now. Changyang, whose voice was low, containing a strong sense of anger. I'm sorry, big brother. I've implicated you. Looking at the pale Changyang, who due to his injuries, Jianchen felt some guilt in his heart. Hearing this, Changyang, who frowned, he suddenly turned his head and looked at Jianchen with some anger. Fourth brother, what are you saying? Do you still treat me as your big brother? At this point, Changyang, whose expression darkened, he sighed helplessly. It's a pity that your big brother is useless. He still hasn't broken through to become a saint. Otherwise, Kadiyun definitely wouldn't be my opponent. Changyang, whose words warmed Jianchen's heart, he raised his head slightly to look at Kadiyun in the arena. A cold light flashed through Jianchen's eyes, and a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes. He then said flatly, Big brother, rest here for a while. I'll go take revenge for you. With that, Jianchen walked towards the arena. Hearing Jianchen's words, Changyang, whose expression changed slightly. He immediately pulled Jianchen back. No, fourth brother. You're no match for Kadiyun. Don't go. Jianchen smiled faintly. Big brother, trust me. Jianchen's expression was filled with strong confidence. He then broke free from Changyang, whose grip, and jumped onto the arena. Heavens, what is he doing? It looks like he's going to challenge Kadiyun. Heavens, is he crazy? He's only at the 8th layer of saint force, yet he dares to challenge Kadiyun, who's already a saint. Isn't he just asking for trouble? As soon as Jianchen stepped onto the arena, cries of surprise rang out from below. No one thought that Jianchen, who only had 80% of saint force, would be a match for Kadiyun, who had condensed a saint weapon and become a saint. How? How can he be so reckless? Kadiyun is a saint. He's much stronger than someone at the 10th layer of saint force. How can he be a match for Kadiyun? Below the arena, the girl who sat across from Jianchen in the library stared at Jianchen in disbelief. There was a faint trace of worry on her face. Kadiyun was stunned when he saw Jianchen jump onto the arena. However, he quickly recovered and sneered. What? Changyang Shoten, do you still want to fight me? Kadiyun did not take Jianchen seriously at all. After all, he was already a saint. Jianchen's eyes were filled with disdain. He said indifferently, can't I? Kadiyun was stunned when he heard that. Then a sinister smile appeared on his face. Yes, of course you can. Right now, Kadiyun was already thinking about how he would humiliate Jianchen. After all, during the freshman competition, Jianchen had thrown Ka Dakialai, a delicate beauty, off the stage without a care for her image. This had caused Kadiyun and Ka Diliang to hold a grudge against Jianchen because they both loved this little sister of theirs dearly. Jianchen walked to the arena unhurriedly to pick up the two-handed greatsword that Changyang who had dropped. Feeling the weight of the greatsword in his hand, Jianchen could not help but frown slightly. Although the great sword weighed less than 100 jin, it was not far off. If it were not for the fact that Jianchen's saint force had reached the 8th layer, it would have been very difficult for him to pick up the great sword. In his previous life, Jianchen's weapon of choice was a slender sword that was 2 fingers wide. He was famous for his fast swordsmanship and his attainments in the way of the sword. Now that he had switched to a 2-handed greatsword, Jianchen could not help but feel that his hands and feet were tied. The great sword was very heavy. Jianqin could not use it at all. After all, just wielding the great sword required a lot of effort. Unfortunately, there were no other weapons here other than the great sword. After a slight hesitation, Jianqin gave up on the idea of using the great sword. He planned to fight Ka Diyun empty-handed. This way, he would at least have a great advantage in terms of speed and dexterity. Arriving at the center of the arena, Jianqin calmly looked at Ka Diyun. He rubbed his fists and said, "You make your move. I will fight you empty-handed." Ka Diyun's expression slightly changed. In his opinion, Jianqin was clearly looking down on him. A person whose saint force was still at the 8th layer actually said that he would fight empty-handed against a saint who had already condensed a saint weapon. This was a ruthless insult to that saint. Ka Diyun's eyes gradually became cold. He coldly snorted and said, "Changyang Shoten, you are too arrogant." Finished speaking, the golden great sword in Ka Diyun's hand slowly disappeared. He sneered and said, "So that others won't say that I am bullying you. Come, I will fight you empty-handed." Hearing this, a strange smile suddenly appeared on Jianqin's face. He did not waste any more words. He quickly rushed forward. When he arrived in front of Ka Diyun, he directly punched out with all his strength. The sound of air breaking could be heard as the punch flew towards Ka Diyun's head. Ka Diyun's face was full of disdain. He also punched out, colliding with Jianqin's fist. On the fist, there was a faint golden light flowing. This was a phenomenon that would only appear when one reached the saint realm. Just as the two fists were about to collide, Jianqin's fist suddenly opened into a palm. When it came into contact with Ka Diyun's fist, Jianqin's fierce palm suddenly became soft like a sponge. Then his whole arm slowly moved in the path of Taiji fist. It led Ka Diyun's fist to the left and circled in the air. In the blink of an eye, the powerful force of Ka Diyun's fist was unloaded. Then he stretched out his other hand like lightning. His palm turned into a knife and fiercely hit the middle joint of Ka Diyun's arm. "Kacha!" A light sound of bones crisscrossing was heard. Jianqin's hand knife directly dislocated Ka Diyun's joint. At the same time, Ka Diyun let out a painful groan. The severe pain from his arm made his face turn pale. After dislocating the joint of Ka Diyun's arm, Jianqin didn't stop at all. His palms tightly clasped Ka Diyun's arm, and then he twisted it with force. Ah! Suddenly, Ka Diyun could no longer maintain his previous demeanor. He let out a painful scream, like a pig being slaughtered. The severe pain from his arm made him feel as if his entire arm was broken. He had never experienced such a heart-wrenching pain since he was a child. In a short time, Ka Diyun's face turned pale, and his forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Hearing Ka Diyun's miserable scream, the originally lively discussion under the ring suddenly became silent. Everyone looked at Jianqin in surprise. Their eyes were full of disbelief. This situation was obviously the opposite of what they had expected. Chapter 23. While feeling the pain, Ka Diyun raised his other hand and smashed it towards Jianqin's arms. At the same time, Ka Diyun's right leg quickly kicked towards Jianqin's crotch. Even though his arms were restricted, Ka Diyun was still able to make a good decision to counterattack. From this, it was not hard to see that Ka Diyun had some experience in fighting. Facing Ka Diyun's double attack, Jianqin was unable to take it head-on. He helplessly let go of Ka Diyun's right arm, and at the same time, he used profound footwork and circled around Ka Diyun's front like a ghost. He arrived behind Ka Diyun and condensed all of his saint force into his palms as he struck towards Ka Diyun's back with lightning speed. Sensing the strong wind coming from behind him, Ka Diyun did not hesitate and quickly dodged to the side. However, to Ka Diyun's surprise, no matter how he dodged, the strong wind behind him continued to follow him. Bang! In a situation where Ka Diyun was unable to dodge at all, Jianqin's palms landed on Ka Diyun's back. With a muffled sound, Ka Dian's body was strongly impacted, and he uncontrollably took 2 steps forward. However, he was still a saint who was stronger than Jianchen after all, so he quickly stabilized himself. At this moment, his face had become even paler. Jianchen's 2 palms had landed on the same spot on his body. The combination of the attacks had almost reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. Even though he was much stronger than Jianchen, he still suffered some light injuries. At this moment, he could only feel the blood and qi in his body churning as great pain came from his organs. Just as Ka Dian stabilized himself, Jianchen had already arrived behind him and struck towards Ka Dian with his right palm again. Jianchen's palm seemed light, as if there was no strength behind it at all. However, to those who had witnessed Jianchen's strength, no one believed that Jianchen's palm was as simple as it seemed on the surface. Ka Dian suddenly turned around. At this moment, his eyes were filled with extreme anger. He had suffered such a great loss at the hands of an opponent who was much weaker than him. To him, this was no longer a simple humiliation. Ka Dian suddenly let out an angry roar. His eyes flashed with madness as a faint golden light constantly flashed on his fist. Powerful Saint Force continued to condense on his fist, and he struck towards Jianchen's chest. Ka Dian did not prepare to dodge Jianchen's seemingly light palm. He planned to take a hit on Jianchen's attack with his own body. Ka Dian had no intention of dodging Jianchen's palm. Everything happened in a split second. Their attacks struck each other at the same time. Jianchen's seemingly light palm strike seemed to have no power at all, silently landing on Ka Dian's chest. When Ka Dian's fist landed on Jianchen's body, a muffled sound rang out. The powerful Saint Force had punched a fist-sized hole in Jianchen's chest, revealing his skin that was so white that even women would be jealous of it. In the blink of an eye, the area that had been hit had become a mass of bruises. Bang! Bang! After receiving Ka Dian's full-strength punch, Jianchen's complexion changed slightly. His originally rosy complexion paled a bit, and the powerful impact of the punch caused him to uncontrollably retreat. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the ring. At this moment, Jianchen's condition looked like nothing had happened except that his complexion was a bit paler than before. Ka Dian's full-strength punch with the strength of a saint didn't cause much damage to Jianchen. Although Jianchen's strength was only at the 8th layer of Saint Force, he had been using the methods recorded in the Azulite Sword Codex to refine his body. His body, meridians, and internal organs were all extremely sturdy. Therefore, although Jianchen looked thin and weak on the surface, his body's defense and ability to resist attacks were jaw-dropping. Although Ka Dian was a saint and was much stronger than Jianchen, if he didn't use a weapon, it would be very difficult for him to heavily injure Jianchen with just his fists and legs. At most, he would only be able to lightly injure Jianchen. On the other hand, although Ka Dian was still standing in his original position, his complexion had become extremely ugly. His facial muscles trembled slightly as if he was in great pain. Earlier, when Jianchen's seemingly light palm landed on his chest, a strange force had been transmitted into his body through Jianchen's palm. As soon as this force entered his body, it suddenly became extremely violent, wildly destroying Ka Dian's internal organs. Ka Dian's complexion was extremely gloomy. He circulated the saint force in his body with all his might to purge the chaotic force. With the support of his powerful saint force, he very quickly purged the force that Jianchen had sent into his body. Even so, Ka Dian's internal organs had been injured by this force. Although the injury wasn't serious, it would still affect his performance in the upcoming battle. Ka Dian's shock was unparalleled as he coldly stared at the calm Jianchen standing in front of him. He had never thought that with his strength as a saint, he would be reduced to such a sorry state by someone with only the 8th layer of saint force. Even though he didn't use a saint weapon, it was still extremely easy for him to defeat someone with the 10th layer of saint force, let alone Jianchen, who only had the 8th layer of saint force. At this moment, after knowing that Jianchen wasn't easy to deal with, Kadiyun couldn't help but feel like he was riding a tiger and couldn't get off. After the previous few exchanges, he understood that if he didn't use a saint weapon, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Jianchen. He might even be defeated by his opponent. But even if he used a saint weapon to defeat Jianchen, it definitely wouldn't be a glorious thing. Moreover, he had clearly said that he wouldn't use a saint weapon. If he went back on his word now, even if he won in the end, his reputation would be ruined. After all, there were many spectators below the stage, and there was no lack of older students among them. Moreover, he, Kadiyun, the eldest son of the Jessan Empire's Kadiyun, couldn't afford to lose face like this. It was a long story, but Kadiyun's thoughts were all in a single thought. At this moment, Jianchen once again charged towards Kadiyun. Both of his hands formed into palms, and he continuously attacked Kadiyun. The speed of his palms was extremely fast, and although his palms looked incomparably chaotic, they maintained a mysterious trajectory from beginning to end. Those lightning-fast palms actually created a series of afterimages in Kadiyun's line of sight. Kadiyun struggled to block Jianchen's attacks. His right hand was dislocated, and he didn't have the time to fix it. At this moment, he could only use his left hand and his two legs to block Jianchen's attacks. Even so, with a saint force that was definitely stronger than Jianchen's, Kadiyun fell into an invincible position for a while. At this moment, Kadiyun had already begun to take Jianchen seriously. He no longer had the slightest bit of a petty heart. In his heart, he had already regarded Jianchen as an opponent on the same level as himself. The two people quickly fought on the stage, and the battle gradually came to a stalemate. Jianchen used his full strength in each of his attacks, not daring to hold back in the slightest. After all, Kadiyun's strength was definitely stronger than his. Only by doing this could he temporarily maintain a stalemate with Kadiyun. Jianchen's attacks became faster and faster. His palms gradually connected in front of Kadiyun's eyes, and it became more and more difficult for Kadiyun to block. Gradually, Kadiyun saw that the sky was filled with Jianchen's palms. It was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake with his eyes. He could only rely on his ears to catch the subtle sound of each palm breaking through the air. Finally, in a moment of carelessness, Jianchen's palm fiercely hit Kadiyun's left shoulder. Kadiyun's following movements couldn't help but slow down after being attacked. At this time, Jianchen's next attack poured down like a torrential storm on Kadiyun's body. Pum! 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 The muffled sounds of Jianchen's palms hitting Kadiyun's body almost merged into one. Receiving such a fierce attack, even with Kadiyun's strength as a saint, he couldn't withstand it. His feet kept retreating, and a trace of blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth. Seeing that Kadiyun had already retreated to the edge of the stage, Jianchen's eyes flashed with a sharp light. He then shouted in a low voice, and once again hit Kadiyun's chest with all his strength. The strength of this palm was clearly much stronger than before, and Kadiyun directly fell out of the stage. Jianchen was slightly panting on the stage. Continuously using his full strength had consumed a lot of his saint force. At this moment, there wasn't much saint force left in his body. If Kadiyun didn't lose, then Jianchen wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. The area below the stage was silent. Everyone stared blankly at Jianchen, who stood proudly on the stage. At this moment, everyone's eyes were filled with disbelief, and their faces were filled with shock. This result had already exceeded everyone's expectations. No one had thought that Jianchen, who was only at the 8th layer of saint force, would be able to defeat a saint. More importantly, he had defeated the saint while he was completely unharmed. Even though the saint hadn't used a saint weapon, the result still shocked everyone present. At this moment, the entire stage had fallen into a strange silence. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard clearly. Even though there were over 200 people surrounding the stage, no one made a single sound. "Big brother, A moment later, the silence was finally broken by a voice. The siblings, Ka Diliang and Ka Dakialai, quickly ran towards where Ka Diyun had fallen. Following this voice, the rest of the crowd abruptly woke up as well. Immediately, the originally quiet stage exploded into an uproar as noisy and excited discussions filled the air. Heavens, I'm not dreaming. A person at the 8th layer of Saint Force can actually defeat a saint. This is unprecedented in our academy. That Changyang Shoten really is a new student who only has 80% Saint Force. Even someone at the peak of the 10th layer might not necessarily be able to defeat a saint without a saint weapon. That Changyang Shoten's strength definitely isn't at the 8th layer of Saint Force. Perhaps he's already a saint who has condensed a saint weapon. Otherwise, how could he have defeated Senior Ka Diyun, who's already a saint? Could it be that Changyang Shoten used some kind of despicable method to defeat Ka Diyun? Genshin ignored the discussions of the crowd. After jumping off the stage, he directly arrived in front of his big brother, Changyang Hu. Looking at Changyang, who was staring at him in shock, Genshin smiled and said, "Big brother, I didn't disappoint you, did I? I won." Changyang, who had an excited expression on his face, he tightly grabbed Genshin's shoulders with both hands and emotionally said, "Fourth brother, you're really too amazing. You actually defeated Ka Diyun, who's already a saint. Your big brother really admires you." With that, Changyang, who directly gave Genshin a bear hug. Chapter 24. Hearing this, Changyang, who subconsciously looked around, then nodded and said, "Okay, fourth brother, let's go to your dorm first. You must tell me how you defeated Ka Diyun, and then I'll invite a few friends to celebrate tonight." Genshin had a faint smile on his face as he said, "Big brother, I can teach you how to defeat Ka Diyun, but as for the celebration, I think we should forget about it." "Okay, we'll do as you say. Let's go, fourth brother. Let's go back to the dorm first. It's too noisy here." Saying this, Changyang, who pulled Genshin, and quickly walked towards the dorm. Changyang Shoten. Just as Genshin had taken a few steps, a delicate and soft voice suddenly sounded from behind him. Hearing this somewhat familiar voice, Genshin was slightly surprised. He immediately turned his head to look behind him and saw that the person who spoke was actually the very beautiful girl he had met in the library before. "What's the matter?" Genshin's gaze calmly observed the girl's devastatingly beautiful appearance as he asked doubtfully. The girl's face revealed a faint smile, as if she was very happy. She waved a very delicately crafted purse in her hand and said with joy, "Changyang Shoten, you've won 100 purple coins for me. Thank you very much." The girl's voice was very gentle, but also very pleasant to listen to, like the cry of a lark, pleasing to the ear. Hearing this, Changyang, who seemed to remember something, he fiercely slapped his forehead and said, "Aya, if you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. I still had 100 purple coins bet. That's all of my property, and I still haven't gotten it back. Fourth brother, wait a moment. Big brother will go get the money." Before he finished speaking, Changyang, who ran off like the wind. Seeing Changyang, whose hurried appearance, Genshin couldn't help but reveal a trace of amusement on his face. At this time, the girl slowly walked in front of Genshin. Her pair of beautiful eyes were filled with curiosity as she stared at Genshin's handsome face. She smiled and said, "Hello, Changyang Shoten. I'm Yu. I don't know if I can ask you a question." Genshin smiled and said, "Classmate Yu, if you have any questions, just ask, but I can't guarantee that I'll be able to answer them." "That's fine." Yu smiled faintly and continued, "Changyang Xiangtian, may I ask if you're really only at the 8th level of Saint Force?" Hearing this, Genshin hesitated slightly before nodding. "Yes, my strength is currently around the 8th layer, but I feel that I'm not far from the 9th layer." Hearing this, Yu's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. She said in surprise, "Changyang Shoten, is your strength really not at the saint realm?" Yu's tone was somewhat doubtful. She clearly didn't quite believe Changyang Shoten's words. Hearing Yu's doubtful words, Gentian frowned slightly and said with a bit of displeasure, "Classmate Yu, I seem to have already answered you." Although she was a devastatingly beautiful woman, in Gentian's eyes, she was no different from an ordinary woman. Hearing this, Sima Yu immediately reacted and smiled apologetically, saying, "I'm sorry, classmate Changyang Xiangtian. I was just too surprised. I hope you don't take offense." As soon as Yu finished speaking, Changyang, who ran out of the crowd with a bag of money in his hand with an excited expression. When he arrived in front of Jianqin, Changyang, who waved the bulging bag in his hand, and said proudly, "Fourth brother, your big brother is wise, right? In such a short time, I've won 100 purple coins." 100 purple coins was not a small amount for ordinary people. But for those commoners who lived a simple life all day, 100 purple coins was enough for their family of 3 to live a carefree life for the rest of their lives. Looking at the bulging bag of money in Changyang's hand, Jianqin's face also showed a trace of joy. Then he said to Yu, "Classmate Yu, if there's nothing else, I'll leave first." Yu smiled and said, "Well, I won't disturb you. It just so happens that I haven't finished reading my book, so I have to go back to the library. Changyang Shoten, goodbye." Then Jianqin took his big brother Changyang, who back to his dormitory. As soon as the door closed, Changyang, who couldn't wait to say, "Fourth brother, now you should tell me how you defeated Ka Diun and how strong you are. Don't tell me you've become a saint like they said." Towards the end, Changyang, who couldn't help showing a shocked expression, Jianqin gently shook his head and said, "No, big brother, my current strength should not be far from the 9th level of Saint Force. As for Saint, I estimate that I'm still some time away." Hearing this, Changyang, whose face showed a trace of doubt, and said, "Fourth brother, since your strength hasn't reached Saint, how did you defeat Ka Diun?" Jianqin smiled mysteriously and said, "Hee, how did I defeat Ka Diun? Big brother, didn't you see it clearly from below the arena?" Hearing this, Changyang, whose face couldn't help but turn red, and he stammered, that fourth brother, actually, big brother didn't see it clearly from below the arena. Can you tell me? Although Changyang, who had seen the battle between Jianqin and Ka Diun from beginning to end, there were many things that he couldn't see through with his eyesight. For example, Jianqin's seemingly light palm strike had transformed his saint force into a strange force and sent it into Ka Diun's body. This was something that they couldn't see through. Jianqin walked to the bed and sat down cross-legged. He calmly looked at Changyang and said, "Big brother, the reason why I was able to defeat Ka Diun, who has already become a saint, with just 80% of my saint force, was completely because I relied on technique." Technique? Hearing this, Changyang, who had a doubtful look in his eyes. He wasn't unfamiliar with techniques because, in the academy, the teachers would talk about techniques. This was because if 2 opponents of the same strength were to fight, then they would rely on powerful techniques and techniques to win. However, techniques were not so easy to learn. Even if one learned them without experiencing many battles, it was impossible to perfectly integrate the techniques into one's moves and use them reasonably. What made Changyang very puzzled was that his fourth brother, who was younger than him and had only been in the academy for a few days, actually knew a very difficult technique. He couldn't help but feel surprised. "Fourth brother, where did you learn these techniques?" Changyang, whose face was full of curiosity. Jianqin shook his head and said, "Big brother, I can't tell you this." Hearing this, Changyang, who had a regretful look on his face. However, Jianqin's next words made Changyang, indescribably excited. "Big brother, if you want to learn fighting techniques, I can teach you." "Really? That's great. Fourth brother, when are you going to teach me techniques? Can you do it now?" Hearing this, Changyang, who was a little impatient, it seemed that he really wanted to learn it immediately and then rely on his 10th layer Saint Force strength to challenge those saints in the academy who had already condensed a saint weapon. Jianqin smiled and said, "Big brother, how about I teach you tomorrow? I'll wait for you in the small forest on the east side of the academy tomorrow morning." Okay, fourth brother, it's a promise. We'll meet in the small forest on the east side of the academy tomorrow morning. Changyang, who happily agreed. Although the teachers in the academy could teach him some fighting techniques, Changyang, who was extremely clear that the fighting techniques taught by those teachers were not as rich as those taught by the elders in his clan. They were simply unable to be used to defeat opponents stronger than him. Afterwards, Jianchen and Changyang, who chatted for a while before Changyang, who left. As for Jianchen, he had used up too much Saint Force in his battle with Kadiun and had also suffered some light injuries. As a result, he had remained in the dormitory and relied on absorbing the energy from the Class 3 Monster Core to recover. Unbeknownst to them, the academy was already in an uproar. The news of Jianchen defeating Kadiun, who had already become a saint with only the 8th layer of Saint Force, had spread through the entire academy in an extremely short amount of time. This matter shocked all the teachers and students of Kargath Academy. When they heard the news, they all felt that it was unbelievable. This was definitely an unprecedented piece of news in Kargath Academy, because even if a saint didn't use a saint weapon, he could still easily defeat 2 people at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force, let alone a new student with only the 8th layer of Saint Force. News of Jianchen defeating a saint without a saint weapon, with just the strength of the 8th layer of Saint Force, quickly reached the headmaster's ears. At the top of the tall tower in the center of Kargath Academy, the dean stood in front of the window with a contemplative expression. He frowned and pondered for a moment before asking, "By N, is what you said true? Did Changyang Xiang really defeat Kadiun, who had already become a saint, with just the strength of the 8th layer?" The principal's voice clearly contained some disbelief as a shrewd light flickered in his deep eyes. Vice Dean Bayan was standing behind the dean, respectfully dressed in a white robe. Hearing the dean's words, Bayan immediately replied, "Sir Dean, I've only heard about this matter from the students. As for the specifics, I'm not too sure. However, this matter has already spread like wildfire in the academy. Almost all the teachers and students know that Changyang Shoten with his 8th layer Saint Force has defeated Kadiun, who has already become a saint. However, the rumor is that Kadiun did not use a saint weapon and instead fought with Changyang Shoten barehanded." The principal stroked his long beard and lowered his head to ponder for a moment before saying, "Since the rumor is so fierce, it seems like it's most likely true. It seems like the kid that old man Chang brought this time isn't simple at all. With just the strength of the 8th level of Saint Force, he was able to defeat a saint. Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. Even if that saint didn't use a saint weapon and had just advanced, his strength was definitely much stronger than someone at the 10th level of Saint Force. I'm afraid that this is the first time since the establishment of our Kargath Academy that someone has defeated someone at a higher level than themselves. Principal, what do you think we should do about this matter? I estimate that the news of Changyang Shoten defeating a saint with his 8th layer Saint Force will soon spread to the ears of the older students who have been cultivating. At that time, Changyang Shoten will be in a lot of trouble." Bai En asked in a very respectful tone. From the way he looked at the dean, there was a hint of respect and admiration. Chapter 25. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed since the battle between Jianchen and Kadiun. Almost everyone in Kargath Academy knew the name of Changyang Shoten. In these 3 days, other than going to the small forest on the east side of the academy to teach Changyang some fighting skills, Jianchen spent the rest of his time cultivating. Now that he had a Class 3 Monster Core in hand, Jianchen's cultivation speed was several times faster than before. He wanted to use this time to reach the 10th layer of Saint Force as soon as possible and then break through to the Saint Realm. After all, Jianchen was very curious about the saint weapon condensed in the body of a saint. According to the introduction in the book, saint weapons were condensed from the Saint Force in the body. Once a saint weapon was condensed, the saint weapon would replace the Saint Force. From then on, the saint weapon would be a person's source of energy. When the saint weapon was in the body, it could act as the Saint Force to be used freely. And when the saint weapon was summoned, it would become the most powerful weapon. By relying on the saint weapon would be able to display a powerful attack that exceeded one's own strength. The saint weapon was the source of everyone's energy. Once the saint weapon was destroyed, not only would the person lose all their cultivation, they would also be seriously injured. In serious cases, they might even die on the spot. However, the saint weapon was very hard. Unless the difference in strength between the two was too great, the saint weapon would not be easily destroyed. Early in the morning, Genshin, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes and ended a night of cultivation. After 3 days of cultivation, the saint force in Genshin's body had increased a lot. According to his estimation, his strength should have reached the 9th layer of saint force. After all, before becoming a saint, the strength of saint force had to be determined through tests. Getting off the bed, Genshin directly left the dormitory. The sky was still gray, and it was not completely bright. At this time, most of the students were still cultivating or sleeping, so the large field was very quiet. Not a single person could be seen. Only in some remote corners could one occasionally find a few students who had woken up early to practice. Passing through the field, Genshin directly walked towards the small forest on the east side of the academy. In the past few days, Genshin would spend some time every morning to teach his older brother about fighting. After all, Genshin was a veteran who had roamed the world for many years in his previous life. He had encountered countless challenges, and his rich battle experience was far from what the teachers in Kargath Academy could compare with. If one really wanted to calculate, Genshin already had the qualifications to teach the teachers in Kargath Academy. When Genshin arrived at the small forest, he found that his older brother, Changyang, had been waiting there for a long time. At this moment, he was sitting on a tree stump and his eyes were a little listless as he looked around the forest. When Changyang saw Genshin, he immediately became spirited and stood up from the tree stump. He happily said, "Fourth brother, you're finally here." Genshin faintly smiled and said, "Big brother, how come you're here so early?" "Haha, I'm used to it. Fourth brother, let's start now. Yesterday morning, you talked about how to use energy. I thought about it for an entire day and still couldn't figure it out. Can you explain it to your older brother again in detail?" Changyang said a little embarrassedly. "Of course." Genshin had a faint smile on his face and said, "Big brother, yesterday morning I told you about how to use energy. Today, I'll personally demonstrate it to you." Saying this, Genshin picked up a small branch by his feet and held it in his hand. "Big brother, watch carefully." Saying this, Genshin held the branch and casually waved it at a small tree that was as thick as a wrist. When the branch approached the small tree, it silently passed through the small tree without meeting any resistance, as if the small tree in front of him was originally illusory. Looking at this strange scene, just as Changyang, was greatly puzzled, with a rustling sound, he saw that the small tree that was as thick as a bull's mouth began to be cut at the waist from where Genshin's branch passed through, and the upper part directly fell down. Changyang, widened his eyes, then quickly came to the front of the small tree that fell down. He saw that the small tree's cut was very smooth, as if it was directly cut by a very sharp weapon. He really couldn't imagine that this smooth cut was actually caused by a small branch that could be easily broken. Immediately, Changyang, whose gaze turned to the small branch in Genshin's hand and quickly snatched it. He held it in his hand and looked at it carefully, but no matter how he looked at it, this small branch was just a very ordinary branch. When he waved it gently, the small branch swayed up and down violently. Seeing this, the doubt in Changyang, whose eyes grew stronger and stronger. He really couldn't understand how such an ordinary branch could cut through a small tree that was as thick as a wrist. Afterwards, Changyang, whose fingers slightly tightened, and with a crack, the small branch in his hand was immediately broken in two. "Fourth brother, how did you do that? How did such a weak branch cut through this small tree?" Changyang, looked at Genshin in confusion and asked curiously. Jianqin chuckled and said, "Big brother, this is actually a kind of use of Saint Force. Let alone this small branch. Even a thread as thick as a needle can easily pierce through this branch. Of course, with my current strength, it's still not enough." "What? A thread as thick as an embroidery needle can penetrate this branch? Fourth brother, are you having a fever? This is simply impossible." Changyang, who cried out in surprise. He didn't believe Jianqin's explanation at all, because he had never heard of such a thing in his entire life. In his opinion, it was simply impossible. Jianqin had a faint smile on his face the entire time. He had clearly expected Changyang whose reaction, but Jianqin didn't explain too much right now. Once Changyang whose strength increased in the future, he would naturally understand this principle. Jianqin picked up a slightly curved branch from the ground and said, "Big brother, weren't you very curious about how I pierced through this small tree with a small branch? Watch closely, I'll show you again." Hearing this, Changyang, who immediately became spirited, he stared at the small branch in Jianqin's hand with all his attention. He didn't dare to be distracted in the slightest, afraid that he would miss the slightest detail. Jianqin casually waved the small piece of paper in his hand, and then a light flashed through his eyes. He didn't seem to make any movements, but the small branch in his hand actually began to twist on its own. The originally curved branch actually began to straighten slowly. At this moment, the small branch seemed to have suddenly become alive, as if it had turned into an agile snake. The other end in Jianqin's hand was the snake's head. The snake's head slowly rose up and then slowly turned a few circles in the air. This scene was extremely strange. Seeing this extremely strange scene, Changyang, whose eyes were already wide open, his face was full of disbelief, as if he had seen a ghost. It was really hard for him to imagine that a small branch could actually twist and turn on its own. Jianqin's eyes gradually emitted a sharp light. He shouted in a low voice, "Big brother, look carefully." As soon as his voice fell, Jianqin held the small branch that had already become straight and slowly pierced forward. Not far in front of him was a small tree that was also as thick as a wrist. Jianqin's speed was not fast. Instead, it was very slow. He slowly approached the small tree. When the small branch in his hand touched the trunk of the small tree, it actually merged into the trunk silently. Then it continued to penetrate at a very slow speed. Finally, it directly pierced through the small tree, and the small branch drilled out from the other side of the trunk. This scene stunned Changyang Hu. His eyes were fixed on the branch that had already penetrated the small tree. His mouth was already wide enough to stuff an egg, and his eyes were full of disbelief. "Fourth brother, how did you do it?" Changyang, whose voice trembled as he asked. His heart was beating violently, but his eyes were still fixed on the small branch that was still stuck in the trunk. Jianqin smiled and said, "Big brother, it's actually not difficult to do this. As long as you fuse Saint Force into the branch, even if it's just an ordinary branch, it can become a divine weapon. If you're strong enough, you can even make the branch cut through metal like mud. Fuse Saint Force into the branch." Hearing this, Changyang, who slightly frowned as he muttered in thought, he immediately picked up a branch from the ground and followed Jianqin's instructions. He controlled the Saint Force in his body and slowly poured it into the branch. Bang! Just as Changyang, whose Saint Force came in contact with the branch in his hand suddenly exploded, turning into fragments that filled the air. "Big brother, your Saint Force is too strong. It's not something that this weak branch can withstand. Moreover, you're not familiar with controlling Saint Force. Remember, when you fuse Saint Force into the branch, you must turn it into a gentle force. Remember not to be too strong." Jianqin attentively taught him from the side. Hearing this, Changyang, whose face was filled with doubt as he asked, "Fourth brother, then how do I turn Saint Force into a gentle force?" Converting Saint Force into a gentle force is only one way to use Saint Force. It's useless for me to explain the mysteries behind it. You'll have to rely on yourself to comprehend it. Big brother, from today onwards, you should try to fuse Saint Force into the branches whenever you have the time. This way, you'll be able to train your usage of Saint Force. If you can do what I'm doing, it'll be of great benefit to your cultivation in the future, Jianchen calmly said, as if he was a teacher teaching his student. However, Jianchen was extremely clear in his heart that if Changyang, who wanted to do what he had just demonstrated, it would be impossible for him to use a weak branch to easily penetrate a small tree that was as thick as a wrist in a short amount of time. This was because the requirements for using Saint Force were extremely high. Before he could master controlling Saint Force, Changyang would not be able to fuse Saint Force into the branch. This was because fusing Saint Force into a branch was extremely difficult. It was not as simple as fusing Saint Force into a weapon made of fine steel. A weapon made of fine steel was extremely tough and could withstand any kind of Saint Force, but a branch could not. Changyang nodded. After a moment of thought, he picked up a branch from the ground and tried again. However, without any exception, all of his attempts ended in failure. He was unable to fuse his Saint Force into the branch at all. Every time his Saint Force approached the branch would explode from being unable to endure the Saint Force that was too powerful. Chapter 26. At this moment, the sky was already bright. When Jianchen passed by the field again, there were already quite a few students moving about. Jianchen calmly looked at the students moving about on the field as he walked towards the library. In the past 3 days, Jianchen had been cultivating his Saint Force and hadn't gone to the library. To him, the only thing in the academy that could attract Jianchen's attention was the books in the library. As for the classes taught by the teachers, Jianchen couldn't be bothered to listen to them. To him, they were just a waste of time. The things the teachers taught were mostly useless to Jianchen. Even if there were some things that could interest Jianchen, he believed that he could find them in the books in the library. After all, the Academy's library had a large collection of books that recorded almost everything on the Tianyuan continent. Hey, look, isn't that student Changyang Shoden? I heard that he defeated Kadiun, who has already become a saint, with just 8 layers of Saint Force. Yeah, I even saw student Changyang Shoten fight during the freshman competition, but it's a pity that I didn't get to see his battle with Kadiun. What a pity. On the field, 2 male students who saw Jianchen stood in the distance and pointed at Jianchen as they discussed in a low voice. Their gazes towards Jianchen were filled with admiration. Wow, Senior Changyang Shoten is so handsome and so powerful. He can actually defeat a saint with just 8 layers of Saint Force. He really is my idol. A noble girl around the same age as Jianchen with an extremely ordinary appearance stared at Jianchen with shining eyes. She exclaimed in a low voice, but her voice was filled with excitement. There were a lot of people on the field, and Jianchen's swagger was quickly noticed by more and more people. Immediately, without exception, everyone stood in the distance and looked at Jianchen as they discussed in low voices. Ever since Jianchen defeated Kadiun, who had already become a saint, his name had spread throughout the entire academy in just a few short hours. Now, even the teachers in the academy knew of Jianchen's name. Very soon, Jianchen passed through the field and arrived in front of a tree-lined path. This was one of the paths that led to the library. Because there weren't many people who went to the library in the academy, the tree-lined path leading to the library was very quiet. There was almost no one in sight. The path was filled with fallen leaves on both sides. As the wind blew, it rustled as countless fallen leaves danced in the air. At this moment, several figures suddenly appeared in front of Jianchen. They were talking and laughing as they walked towards Jianchen. There were 4 people in total, and they were all around the age of 10. They were all wearing the academy's uniform. Just from this, one could tell that they were all students of the academy. Jianchen paid no attention to the 4 students in front of him and continued on his path. However, just as Jianchen approached the 4 of them and was about to pass by them, the 4 of them suddenly moved together as if they had already discussed this. They surrounded Jianchen from 4 directions. Jianchen stopped and calmly looked at the 4 students who were slightly older than him. He sneered, "Seniors, may I ask what the meaning of this is?" Although the 4 of them were wearing the academy's uniform, it was still unable to hide the arrogance on their faces. "Kid, you look quite unfamiliar. You must be new." The person facing Jianchen sneered as he glared at Jianchen. Jianchen was calm as his eyes met the person who spoke. He smiled. "That's right. I am indeed new. May I ask what advice you seniors have for me?" With that, the young man chuckled. "If you want to properly stay in the academy, you can't do so without our protection. However, if you want our protection, you have to pay a certain fee. Since you're new, we'll charge you 10 purple coins. How about it? It's worth it, right?" The young man had a confident smile on his face. In his heart, he believed that he already had Jianchen under control. This was because, from his point of view, he could determine that Jianchen's strength wasn't very strong from Jianchen's thin and weak body. This was because he had done this many times in the academy and could be said to be very experienced. If he encountered a student with a strong body, he might consider it. However, for someone as thin and weak as Jianchen, he didn't even need to consider it. In the past, when he collected protection fees from students as thin and weak as Jianchen, it was a 100% success rate. There was no resistance at all. If Jianchen was a commoner, the 4 of them definitely wouldn't dare to collect protection fees from Jianchen unless they didn't want to stay in the academy anymore. After all the seniors in Kargath knew that the dean was very biased towards commoner students, and the 4 of them had stayed in the academy for a long time. They could recognize the commoner students at a glance. So when they saw Jianchen for the first time, they knew that Jianchen was definitely not a commoner. This was why they dared to collect protection fees from him. After hearing the young man's words, Jianchen sneered in his heart. He didn't expect that the young man was actually here to collect protection fees. "Seniors, I'm very sorry. I refuse your protection." Jianchen's tone was very calm. After he finished speaking, he didn't wait for the others to reply. He directly used his shoulder to push the young man in front of him away and continued to walk towards the library. Jianchen's action made the 4 young men stunned. Obviously, this situation was out of their expectations. They didn't expect that Jianchen, who they thought was already in the bag, would actually refuse their protection so straightforwardly. The 4 of them quickly reacted. Staring at Jianchen, who had already walked out of their encirclement, the 4 young men's eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. And the young man who was pushed away by Jianchen's shoulder had a very ugly expression on his face. "Damn it, brat, you stop right there." The young man who was pushed away by Jianchen shouted angrily. He quickly ran towards Jianchen and blocked him in front of him again. Then the other 3 young men quickly came to Jianchen's side and surrounded Jianchen again. "You actually just bumped into me. You're really tired of living." The young man who felt that he had lost all face angrily shouted in a low voice. Then he directly slapped towards Jianchen's face. Looking at the young man's palm that was about to slap his face, Jianchen's calm and ordinary eyes instantly became fierce. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Then he quickly raised his right hand and reached out with lightning speed that the young man couldn't react to. Halfway through, he steadily borrowed the young man's palm. Then Jianchen quickly kicked out and directly hit the young man's chest. Following a muffled sound, the young man was directly sent flying by Jianchen's powerful kick. Then he fell heavily on the ground without any care for his image. The sudden unforeseen event made the 3 young men surrounding Jianchen stunned for a moment. No one would have thought that a freshman who was easy to bully in their eyes would suddenly become so powerful. Before they could react, one of their companions was directly sent flying by a kick. However, they quickly regained their senses. Almost at the same time, their faces were filled with killing intent. Then, without any reason, as if they had discussed beforehand, the 3 of them actually attacked Jianchen at the same time. Although they knew that Genshin's strength wasn't ordinary, the four of them were used to running amok in Kargath Academy. They didn't fear Genshin at all. Even if Genshin's strength was so strong that even the four of them together couldn't contend against him, they still didn't fear him. This wasn't only because each of them had a huge family behind them, but more importantly, they had a solid backing in Kargath Academy. Feeling the Saint Force released by the three of them was even stronger than his own, Genshin's face showed a trace of disdain. From the moment the three of them attacked, he could determine their strength from the Saint Force they released. They were roughly at the 10th layer of Saint Force. The speed of the three of them was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they were already in front of Genshin. However, at this crucial moment, Genshin's body slightly swayed and instantly escaped from their attack range with a speed faster than their fists. The three of them missed at the same time. However, before they could retract their fists, Genshin's fist had already arrived at the head of one of them. The speed of the fist was so fast that the three of them didn't have time to react. Bang! Following a muffled sound, the young man who was hit in the head by Genshin was directly knocked unconscious and fell to the ground. At the same time, Genshin's right leg quickly kicked out. Before the other two could react, it viciously kicked one of them in the chest. Following a muffled sound, the young man was already prepared, so he only staggered a few steps back after receiving Genshin's kick. He quickly stabilized his body, but even so, his face was still pale. This was because the two great forces from Genshin's kick had shaken his internal organs a little. Furthermore, traces of weak Saint Force had also entered his body through Genshin's foot, destroying his internal organs. Just as the young man regained his footing, Genshin's second kick had already been sent out. It brought about a series of afterimages in the air and once again kicked the young man's chest. The two footprints perfectly overlapped. This time, Genshin's kick had actually landed precisely on the same spot. Receiving two consecutive heavy blows in the same spot, the young man's injuries were not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. When Genshin's second kick landed on his chest, even though he had the strength of the 10th layer of Saint Force, he was still severely injured. Intense pain came from his internal organs. For a moment, the young man's face turned pale. His internal chi was blocked, making it difficult for him to breathe. He staggered a few steps back and finally lost his footing, falling to the ground and unable to get up again. Seeing Genshin defeat his companion in the blink of an eye, the remaining young man's face could not help but change. Just as he was about to charge at Genshin, he suddenly stopped. His feet were deeply rooted to the ground, and he did not dare to take a single step forward. His eyes were filled with vigilance as he stared at Genshin. His expression was no longer as calm as before, but solemn. Genshin looked at him indifferently. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Without saying anything, he turned around and left, heading towards the library. After Genshin left, the two young men who had been beaten to the ground by Genshin climbed up from the ground in a sorry state. Their eyes were filled with hatred as they stared at Genshin's back. One of them said in a deep voice, "Who is he? He's actually so strong that even we are not his opponent. Is he really a new student who just entered the school this year? How can he be so strong?" Chapter 27. At this moment, the young man who had luckily escaped arrived before the two of them. Looking at the pale-faced young man who had been kicked twice by Genshin, he asked in concern, "Luo Yun, are you all right?" The young man called Luo Yun shook his head slightly and said weakly, "It's not a big problem. I'll be fine after a few days of rest." He then changed his tone and looked at the uninjured young man. "Carl, you're more well-informed in the academy. Find out who that person is as soon as possible and get young Master Chung to deal with him." The young man called Carl pondered for a moment before replying, "There's no need to investigate. I might already know who he is." The other two beamed with joy. Luo Yin said, "That's great. Carl, who is that person?" Among the new students this year, there's one person who's especially powerful. He defeated Kadiun, who had condensed a saint weapon and become a saint, with just the strength of the 8th layer of saint force. He might be that person. Karl's voice was rather heavy. Karl's words made their expressions change slightly. They looked at each other before Luo Yun said softly, "Could he be Changyang Shoten?" Karl nodded. "It's very possible. Among the new students this year, probably only Changyang Shoten can defeat us. If that person really is Changyang Shoten, it makes sense that we wouldn't be his opponent. After all, he was able to defeat Kadiun, who had already become a saint. Even though Kadiun didn't use a saint weapon, it's enough to prove that Changyang Shoten is powerful." So what if he's Changyang Shoten? "Since he's offended us, we definitely won't let him have an easy time in the academy," said the young man who had been attacked by Genshin the first time. A cold smile appeared on Luo Yun's pale face as he said in a low voice, "Coincidentally, our Luo family's eldest young master has been looking everywhere for news about Changyang Shoten. I reckon that he's interested in Changyang Shoten. It's a pity that we don't know where Changyang Shoten has been hiding for the past few days. We couldn't find him even after searching for a few days. I didn't expect to meet him here today. Luo Yun, go find your Luo family's eldest young master, Qin Feng, and I will call young Master Cheng out. I don't believe that Changyang Shoten is a match for young Master Cheng," Karl said in a low voice. "All right, we'll go our separate ways. However, I think it would be better to leave someone behind to keep an eye on Changyang Shoten. The academy is so big. If Changyang Shoten hides somewhere and refuses to come out, how are we going to find him?" Luo Yun suggested. Karl nodded. He then turned his gaze to the young man beside him and said, "Qin Feng, you stay behind and secretly follow Changyang Shoten. I'll go get young Master Cheng." "No problem." The young man called Qin Feng agreed without any hesitation. After the 3 of them finished their work, Qin Feng followed the direction that Genshin had left in while the other 2 carried the unconscious young man on the ground and quickly left. In the library, Genshin picked 2 books from the bookshelves before sitting down at a table and reading them with great interest. Perhaps it was because it was too early, but the library was very quiet. Other than Genshin, there was only a middle-aged woman who was busy cleaning the library. The middle-aged woman seemed to be in her 40s. She had an ordinary appearance and belonged to the general population. Due to her lack of talent in cultivation, her saint force was only at the 6th layer even though she was already in her 40s. Even Kargas and the other new students were stronger than her. The middle-aged woman raised her head and looked at Genshin, who was engrossed in reading. Although she did not know Genshin's name, she had a very deep impression of him. This was because other than the past 3 days, Genshin was the first student to come to the library every morning. Moreover, he would often read for an entire day. Sometimes he would even skip lunch. She had been cleaning the library in the academy for several years now. Genshin was the first student she had met who was so hardworking. What a hardworking child! The middle-aged woman let out a soft sigh. She then ignored Genshin and continued with her work. In a spacious stone house, a young man in his 20s stood in the middle of the stone house with his eyes closed. His body was in a very strange posture, as if he was a piece of wood standing there, motionless. Dong, dong, dong! At this moment, a dull knocking sound came from the outside. At the same time, the young man's closed eyes slowly opened. He turned his head slightly, still maintaining that strange posture as he looked in the direction of the door. He said in a low voice, "Who is it?" "Young master, it's me, Luo Yun." A soft voice came from outside the door. "Come in," the young man said calmly. The door opened and a young man around 20 years old wearing a school uniform walked in. This person was one of the 4 people who had a conflict with Genshin. His name was Luo Yun. Luo Yun looked at the young man who was sitting in a strange posture. He did not feel the slightest bit surprised, as if it was a common occurrence. This was because the young man's strange posture was their Luo family's cultivation method. In the Tianyuan continent, there were countless secret manuals and methods of cultivation. Among them, not only did meditation cultivate, there were also many people who relied on some kind of movement or special posture to cultivate. The Luo family's cultivation method was obviously the latter. They used their body to make some special posture to cultivate. Luo Yin came before the young man and bowed slightly. He said respectfully, "Young master, haven't you been looking for Chanyang Shoten's whereabouts all this time? Just now I happened to find Chanyang Shoten." Although Luo Yan's family was considered to have a high status in the Luo family, he did not dare to show the slightest bit of impudence in front of this young man. This young man was the only son of the Luo family's current patriarch, Luo Jian. He was deeply doted on by the patriarch and had already been decided as the future successor of the Luo family. Luo Yin only had the intention to curry favor with Luo Jian. "I've found Chanyang Shoten." Hearing this, Luo Jian's eyes lit up. He glanced at Luo Yan's pale face and casually shifted his gaze downwards, landing on the faint footprint on Luo Yan's chest. He said arrogantly, "Looking at how miserable you are, you must have suffered quite a bit at the hands of Chanyang Shoten." Luo Jian furrowed his brows and said in a deep voice, "Stop hemming and hawing. What did Chanyang Shoten say about me?" Luo Yan's eyes were red as they flickered. He hesitated for a moment. Then, as if he had gathered enough courage, he said in a low voice, "Chanyang Shoten said that you are nothing. You're not even qualified to carry his shoes." "What?" Luo Jian's face suddenly changed when he heard this. He immediately became furious. Although the Luo clan was not a peak clan that had stood on the Tianyuan continent for over 1,000 years, it was still one of the largest clans in the kingdom of Jessen. It had a history of over 200 years. Even with the entire kingdom of Jessen in perspective, there were only a handful of clans that were more powerful than the Luo clan. As the future successor of the Luo clan, Luo Jian's status was extremely noble. Even the princess and the crown prince of the kingdom were on equal footing with him. He had never thought that an unknown new student in Kargath Academy would actually dare to speak such arrogant words. How could Luo Jian, who had been proud since he was young, swallow this anger? Luo Jian stared sharply at Luo Yun and said in a low voice, he really said that. Luo Jian's voice was filled with unconcealable anger. Seeing Luo Jian's reaction, Luo Yun's eyes flashed with a trace of joy. However, he was quickly stunned by Luo Jian's reaction. He hurriedly said, "Yes, young master. Luo Yun's words are all true. I don't dare to have the slightest intention of offending you. This Chanyang Shoten has really gone too far. He doesn't even respect you, young master. Moreover, he has arrogantly insulted you. If you don't properly teach him a lesson, where will you put your face in the future? I'm afraid you'll become a laughingstock in the academy." Hearing Luo Yun's words, Luo Jian's face gradually darkened. He then slowly stood up and said in a low voice, "Where is Chanyang Shoten? Lead the way. Since he doesn't respect me, I'd like to see just how capable he is." Yes, young master, please follow me." After saying that, Luo Yun walked out of the stone house and led the gloomy Luo Jian towards the direction of the library. At the same time, in another direction of the Kargath Academy, Karl, who had just left, was respectfully leading a few arrogant young men around the age of 20 towards the library. When the few of them passed by the field, some of the older students recognized them and their expressions changed. Soon after, whispers of discussion could be heard from all directions. Isn't the person in the middle young Master Chung? He hasn't walked around the academy for a year. What kind of wind blew him out today?" A 20-year-old senior stared at the few young men not far away and muttered in a low voice. His tone was filled with surprise. "I heard that young Master Ching had already reached the strength of an intermediate saint a year ago. I wonder how strong young Master Cheng is now." Young Master Cheng is a publicly acknowledged genius in our Kargath Academy. He condensed a saint weapon at the age of 19 and became a saint. He reached the strength of an intermediate saint at the age of 20. Now that a year has passed, with young Master Cheng's talent, he should have already reached the strength of a high-level saint. Yeah, young Master Cheng is the person with the fastest cultivation speed in our Kargath Academy. I heard that the principal once said that young Master Cheng will definitely reach the strength of a great saint before the age of 23. Reaching the strength of a great saint at the age of 23, young Master Cheng is really amazing. There are many older students in the academy who are still stuck at the peak of the 10th layer of saint force at his age. As Carl's group slowly passed by the field, the older students they met along the way discussed in low voices. Young Master Cheng was an extremely famous person in Kargath Academy. It wasn't because of his character, but because of his astonishing cultivation speed. Even on the Tianyuan continent, he could be called a genius. Among the students of Kargath Academy, young Master Cheng's strength was already at the peak. Chapter 28. Very soon, Luo Yun brought Luo Jian to the entrance of the library. Not far from the entrance, Chen Feng, who was tailing Jian Qin, was leaning against a small tree. From time to time, he would glance at Jian Qin, who was engrossed in reading the books in the library, as if he had completely entered a state of selflessness. When Chen Feng saw Luo Yun and Luo Jian, he immediately ran over and bowed slightly to Luo Jian. With a flattering smile on his face, he said, "I didn't think that I would meet young Master Luo here. It's really an honor for me to meet you here." Chen Feng's attitude was quite respectful. Although his family was still a noble, it was only a small noble in the kingdom of Jessen. In the academy, he only dared to collect protection fees by mingling with the children of the big families. At this moment, if he could make use of Changyang Shoten's matter to establish a relationship with the young master of the Luo family, it would be very beneficial for him in the future. Even his family would be able to climb up a big tree because of this. After all, Luo Jian was the future successor of the Luo family. Luo Jian arrogantly looked at Chen Feng, who was being respectful towards him. He impatiently waved his hand and said, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Is Changyang Shoten in the library right now?" Hearing Luo Jian's rude words, Chen Feng's face didn't reveal the slightest trace of anger. His face was still full of smiles as he said, Yes, Changyang Shoten has always been in the library." Hearing this, Luo Jian's face gradually revealed a trace of a cold smile as he said, "Good, then you go and call Changyang Shoten out for me." The prohibition of all fighting in the library was set by the headmasters of the academy. Even if Luo Jian had a strong family behind him, he still wouldn't dare to casually break the rules of the academy. "Yes, young Master Luo, I will go and call Changyang Shoten out." After saying that, Chen Feng immediately ran towards the library. Within the library, Jian Chen's attention was completely focused on the books. He had already lowered his vigilance to the lowest level. After all, this was Kargath Academy. There was no need to worry about safety at all. There was no need to be vigilant at all times. Just as Jian Chen was engrossed in reading the book, he suddenly felt someone pat his shoulder. When he reluctantly looked away from the book, he saw a young man standing beside him, looking at him with a cold smile. With Jian Chen's photographic memory, he immediately recognized this young man as one of the 4 people who had stopped him on the road to collect protection fees. Chen Feng stood beside Jian Chen and looked at Jian Chen with eyes full of schadenfreude. He said in a very strange tone, "Changyang Shoten, you didn't expect us to meet again so soon, did you?" "It's you." Jian Chen slightly frowned and said in a low voice without giving face, "If you are here to collect protection fees, then you can get out of here." Hearing this, Chen Feng's eyes flashed with anger. However, he didn't dare to make a move against Jian Chen. Not to mention that the library was an important place in the academy where fighting was prohibited. He also understood that he wasn't Jian Chen's opponent. Chen Feng's chest violently heaved up and down. He stared fiercely at Jian Chen and said in a cold voice, Changyang Shoten, although I am not your opponent, Kargath Academy is not a place where you can be arrogant. If you have the guts, then come out with me. Otherwise, you can prepare to stay in the library for the rest of your life." After saying this, Qin Feng directly walked out of the library. However, his arrival and the words he said attracted the attention of everyone in the library. Immediately, many people looked at Jianqin with curiosity, envy, worship, jealousy, and other complicated gazes. Jianqin slowly closed the book and frowned slightly. From Chen Feng's words, he understood that they had found a helper to deal with him. Jianqin's eyes flashed. He lowered his head and thought for a while. Then he slowly closed the book and took the book to the front of the bookshelf. After putting the book back in its original position, he walked out. Now that there were people waiting for him outside, if he didn't go, then it would seem that he was afraid of them. Moreover, in order for him to be able to quietly read books in the future, in order for him to be able to live a peaceful life in Kargath Academy, he had to display a strength that would make others fear him. Otherwise, if any random cat or dog came to find trouble with him, then he wouldn't need to come to the library to read books. Although Jianqin knew that the people outside were definitely not weak and were likely to be experts at the same level as Kadiun, he wasn't afraid at all. He was confident that with his current strength, even if he couldn't win against a saint, he definitely wouldn't lose easily. After all, no matter if it was his fighting experience or skills, they were far from what a student in the academy could compare to. Moreover, he was someone who had experienced many life and death situations. As soon as Jianqin walked out of the library, he raised his head and saw 3 youths standing outside the library. The 3 of them were about the same age and were all wearing the academy's uniform. 2 of them were the ones who had asked Jianqin for protection fees. As for the other person, Jianqin could tell from the arrogant expression on his face that he was the helper they had found. Seeing that Jianqin had really walked out of the library, Luo Yun revealed a sinister smile. He then whispered to Luo Jian, who was standing beside him, "Young master, he's Changyang Shoten." Luo Jian arrogantly sized up Jianqin. His eyes were filled with disdain as he coldly said, "Boy, you're Changyang Shoten." Jianqin looked at Luo Jian indifferently. Luo Jian looked to be about 22 or 23 years old. He was very handsome, but his expression was filled with undisguised arrogance. "And who are you?" Jianqin looked at Luo Jian indifferently and asked coldly. As soon as Jianqin finished speaking, Luo Yun, who was standing beside Luo Jian, shouted, "How dare you, Changyang Shoten? Who do you think you are? You actually dare to use this kind of tone to speak to my young master. Do you not want to stay in the academy anymore?" Changyang Shoten quickly apologized to young Master Luo. "Otherwise, don't even think about staying in Kargath Academy." Qin Feng didn't want to miss such a good opportunity to curry favor with Luo Jian, so he angrily shouted at Jianqin. Hearing the words of the 2 Luo family's young master Luo, Jian's expression became even more arrogant. His face was filled with pride. Jianqin's indifferent face gradually revealed a trace of a sneer. He looked at the 3 people in front of him with eyes filled with disdain and said, "From the meaning of your words, could it be that the Dean of Kargath Academy will listen to the orders of the 3 of you? Or perhaps this Kargath Academy is run by your family. Whoever you want to leave must leave. The 3 of you are really daring to actually not put the Dean in your eyes." Hearing Jianqin's words, Luo Yun and Qin Feng's complexion suddenly changed and became a little pale. Not only the 2 of them, but even Luo Jian's face became very ugly after hearing Jianqin's words. He looked at Jianqin with eyes full of resentment. Although the 3 of them had a certain amount of power behind them, and Luo Jian was the future successor of the Luo family, one of the top 2 families in the Jessan Empire, they still didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect to the Dean of Kargath Academy. If Jianqin's words were to reach the Dean's ears, then they would receive a very serious punishment. If the situation was serious, they might even be expelled from the academy. Even if Luo Jian had a great background, even if his father was the Luo family, Even if Luo Jian was the future successor of the Luo family, it would still be useless. Their Luo family would absolutely not offend the dean of Kargath Academy for him. Luo Jian's face was gloomy. He stared at Jianchen with a sharp gaze and said, "Changyang Shoten, you really are very arrogant. But I don't know if you have the qualifications to be arrogant." Jianchen smiled disdainfully and coldly said, "Less nonsense. Tell me your intentions." A cold smile appeared on Luo Jian's face. His voice was full of murderous intent as he said, "My intentions are very simple. I just want to meet you. I want to see how strong Changyang Shoten is after defeating a newly promoted saint without using his saint weapon Cardi Cloud." After saying that, Luo Jian rubbed his fists and slowly stepped forward. As he clenched his fists, a clear sound of bones cracking could be heard. At the same time, a strong pressure was emitted from Luo Jian's body, directly oppressing Jianchen. At this moment, in the library behind him, some of the students who had been reading put down the books in their hands and gathered at the entrance of the library. They were all watching Jianchen and the others talk in low voices with great interest. They were completely watching this scene with the mentality of watching a show. Jianchen was unmoved by Luo Jian's qi. He stood in place like a towering mountain. Jianchen was very clear about Luo Jian's strength. He was definitely much stronger than Cardi Cloud. However, Jianchen was not afraid at all. Instead, his fighting spirit was high. Seeing that the two sides were about to fight, some of the people in the library behind him immediately retreated far away, for fear of being affected. How can we miss out on such a wonderful fight? Just as the two were about to fight, a sudden voice came from behind. As soon as the voice fell, several young men in school uniforms walked over from behind. There were a total of 5 people, except for one of them whom Jianchen recognized as one of the 4 people who had collected protection fees from him. He did not know any of the other 4. However, he could tell at a glance that these 4 people were from big families. There was always a look of superiority between their brows. However, the young man standing in the middle of the 5 people attracted Jianchen's attention. With his eyesight, he could see at a glance that this young man seemed to be surrounded by the other 4 people. This young man was not very old. Judging from his appearance, he looked to be in his 20s. Ah, look, isn't that young Master Cheng who hasn't appeared for a year? I didn't expect him to come. Yes, that's young Master Cheng. He is a genius of our Kargath Academy. It is said that his strength had reached the intermediate stage of the Saint Realm a year ago. With his cultivation talent, I thought young Master Cheng had broken through the Saint Realm to become a great saint and graduated. I didn't expect him to still stay in the academy. I just don't know what young Master Cheng's strength has reached now. Has he reached the great Saint Realm? The 3 people standing next to young Master Cheng seem to have condensed a holy weapon. I didn't expect that the Academy's rarely seen experts would come here. As soon as they saw the young man in the middle, the students standing in the library suddenly exclaimed in a low voice and began to talk. Chapter 29. The young man named Cheng Mingxiang, who was standing in the middle, smiled and said, "There's no way I'd miss such a good show." Cheng Mingxiang glanced at Jianchen as a look of disdain appeared on his face. He said disdainfully, "You're probably Changyang Shoten, right?" "That's right, young Master Cheng. He's the Changyang Shoten who injured the 4 of us," Carl hurriedly answered as soon as Cheng Mingxiang finished speaking. Cheng Mingxiang nodded slightly and said arrogantly, "Changyang Shoten, you're not bad. You even dared to hit the person I'm protecting." Cheng Mingxiang's voice became deeper and deeper as he spoke. Jianchen already knew that the other party was a group of unreasonable, hedonistic young masters. It was useless to reason with them. The only way was to use strength to speak. Thinking to this point, Jianchen did not waste any more words with them. He coldly snorted and said, "So what if I hit you? If you're not convinced, then go ahead and attack. There's no need to talk so much nonsense." Hearing Jianchen's words, Cheng Mingxiang's face gradually turned ashen. He angrily said, Good. Then let me see just how capable you are." With that, Cheng Mingxiang's body flashed and crossed the distance of nearly 10 meters in the blink of an eye. He arrived in front of Jianqin and directly punched at Jianqin's nose. Cheng Mingxiang did not plan on using a saint weapon to deal with a new student who was not even a saint yet. Jianqin also knew that Cheng Mingxiang was much stronger than Jianqin. The difference in saint force between them was too great, so Jianqin did not choose to receive Cheng Mingxiang's attack head-on. Just as Cheng Mingxiang's fist was about to land on Jianqin's head, Jianqin tilted his head slightly and dodged it by a hair's breadth. At the same time, Jianqin instantly raised his arms and grabbed Cheng Mingxiang's arm. He then lowered his waist and straightened his back, pulling Cheng Mingxiang's arm back with both hands. Cheng Mingxiang's center of gravity was already tilted forward when he threw the punch. Now that Jianqin was pulling him, his body immediately tilted forward uncontrollably. However, Cheng Mingxiang reacted very quickly. He immediately took a step forward and leaned back, trying his best to control his body. However, at this moment, Jianqin suddenly let go of Cheng Mingxiang's arm. Both of his hands formed palms and slammed into Cheng Mingxiang's chest as fast as lightning. Cheng Mingxiang's center of gravity was already tilted to the back. Now that he received Jianqin's almost full force attack, he immediately began to stagger backwards. Looking at the momentum of his retreat, it was as if he could lose his balance and fall to the ground at any time. After retreating more than 10 meters, Cheng Mingxiang finally stabilized his body. However, at this moment, his face had already turned the color of pig liver, gloomy and dark. His eyes were filled with hatred as he looked at Jianqin. With his status, he was one of the top powerhouses in the academy. At this moment, he actually suffered such a big loss in the hands of someone who was much weaker than him and had not even reached the saint realm. How could he not feel angry? If this matter were to spread in Kargath Academy, not only would he lose face, but he would also become a huge laughingstock. Thinking of this, Cheng Mingxiang could not help but feel a killing intent towards Jianqin, because for him, this was absolutely an unacceptable humiliation. At this moment, the surroundings had already become deathly silent. Everyone, including Luo Jian, had a dull expression on their faces. Their gazes towards Jianqin were filled with astonishment, shock, and disbelief. This result was clearly out of everyone's expectations. No one would have thought that Cheng Mingxiang, who had been famous in Kargath Academy for a long time and was known as a cultivation genius, would suffer such a huge loss in just a short exchange of blows with someone who hadn't even reached the saint realm. Moreover, he appeared to be in an extremely sorry state. Cheng Mingxiang's face was gloomy as he stared fiercely at Jianqin. Then, a silver-white two-handed sword gradually appeared in his hand. He shouted angrily, "Chongyang Shoten, today I will definitely cripple you." After saying that, Cheng Mingxiang rushed towards Jianqin with a silver-white two-handed sword in his hand. "Stop!" Just as Cheng Mingxiang moved, a deep voice suddenly sounded from outside. Then, a rather sturdy and dark-skinned young man slowly walked in. When Jianqin saw this sturdy young man, a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. This was because this person was the man with innate divine strength that he had met in the freshman competition, Tai Ta. When Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang's gaze fell on Tai Ta, their faces changed slightly and a trace of fear appeared in their eyes. Luo Yin did not recognize Tai Ta. He shouted at Tai Ta arrogantly, "Who are you? It's best if you don't meddle in the matters between our young master and young Master Cheng. Otherwise, don't blame. Shut up." Without waiting for Luo Yin to finish his words, Luo Jian suddenly shouted and interrupted Luo Yin. Ignoring the stunned Luo Yin, Luo Jian's face hung a trace of a smile. He slightly cupped his hands towards Tai Ta and said with a smile, "So it's Brother Tai Ta. I wonder what brings Brother Tai Ta here." Tai Ta looked at Luo Jian strangely and said in a low muffled voice, "Who are you?" "I don't know you." Tai Ta then ignored the unsightly Luo Jian and directly walked to Jianqin's side. He raised his hand and fiercely patted Jianchen's shoulder. He laughed and said, "Changyang Shoten, I didn't expect to meet you here. I haven't seen you for several days." Jianchen smiled slightly and said, "Tai Ta, let's talk later. Let me deal with this troublesome matter first." Hearing this, Tai Ta's gaze slowly swept across Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian's group. He then pointed at them and said in a low, muffled voice, "Changyang Shoten, did they bully you?" You can say that. Jianchen slowly crossed his arms in front of his chest and said indifferently. Hearing this, Tai Ta immediately rolled up his sleeves and looked fiercely at the group opposite him. He said loudly, "Changyang Shoten is my brother. If you bully him, you bully me. If anyone wants to fight me, stand out. You may be stronger than me, but I, Tai Ta, am not afraid of you." Hearing Tai Ta's words, Jianchen was slightly stunned. He looked at Tai Ta with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand when he became Tai Ta's brother. Cheng Mingxiang and Luo Jian's expression slightly changed. They looked at each other and saw a trace of dignified expression in each other's eyes. Obviously, they were deeply afraid of Tai Ta. Although Tai Ta's strength wasn't strong and they could easily defeat him, Tai Ta had a powerful backer behind him that even they were afraid of. This was why they didn't dare to touch Tai Ta in the slightest in Kargath Institute. They didn't speak again. Carl, Luo Yin, and Luo Jian could see that Tai Ta's identity wasn't ordinary from Luo Jian's attitude. Therefore, they were very smart and didn't say anything. For a moment, the atmosphere around them became a little strange. After a moment of silence, it was Luo Jian who broke the silence. "Brother Tai Ta, this is a matter between us and Changyang Shoten. I hope you won't interfere." Luo Jian's tone was extremely polite. He knew that although Tai Ta was born a commoner, his current status was no weaker than his own. In fact, Tai Ta's status was even slightly higher than his. Even if he became the head of the Luo family in the future, he would only be able to maintain an equal status with Tai Ta. Luo Jian's words shocked all the students in the library. Many of the older students recognized Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang. They knew that not only were they powerful, but they also had a huge clan behind them. However, the two of them were actually so polite to Tai Ta, who had appeared out of nowhere. This made all the students in the library guess at Tai Ta's identity. They wondered just what kind of background Tai Ta had to make the arrogant Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang, who were usually so arrogant in the academy, so afraid of him. Unfortunately, Tai Ta didn't appreciate their kindness at all. He said, without giving them any face, "I've already said that Changyang Shoten is my brother. His matters are my matters. If there's anything, just come at me." Luo Jian's expression changed slightly when he heard that. His eyes became slightly stern. He really didn't dare to offend Tai Ta too much. At this moment, the gloomy Cheng Mingxiang coldly snorted. He glared at Tai Ta and said in a deep voice, "Tai Ta, are you really going to interfere in this matter?" After suffering a big loss at the hands of Jianchen, Cheng Mingxiang already hated Jianchen. Being forced into such a difficult situation by a freshman who hadn't even reached the Saint Realm was definitely a great humiliation for Cheng Mingxiang. If he couldn't wash it off, then he wouldn't be able to stay in the academy in the future. "That's right, I'm going to interfere." Tai Ta's expression darkened as he shouted loudly. Although he knew that Cheng Mingxiang was very strong, Tai Ta didn't show the slightest fear. Jianchen pulled Tai Ta and said, "Tai Ta, this is between me and them. Don't interfere. Otherwise, it'll bring you a lot of trouble." A trace of anger flashed through Tai Ta's eyes. He suddenly turned his head to look at Jianchen. He frowned and said unhappily, "Changyang Shoten, what are you saying? Do you think I'm afraid of trouble? Do you still treat me as a friend?" Jianchen couldn't help but feel puzzled when he heard that. He didn't know when he had such a close relationship with Tai Ta. It seemed that they hadn't even met many times. The only place where they had some interaction was at the freshman competition. "Tai Ta, since you're asking for trouble, don't blame me. Don't think that I won't dare to touch you just because you're the principal's disciple. Let me see how capable the principal's disciple is. Cheng Mingxiang directly charged at Tai Ta. Hearing Cheng Mingxiang's words, Jianqin was slightly surprised. He didn't expect Tai Ta to actually become the principal's disciple. If this news were to spread throughout the academy, it would probably set off a frenzied wave. At this time, Cheng Mingxiang had already arrived in front of Tai Ta and directly punched at Tai Ta's chest. Due to Tai Ta's special status, Cheng Mingxiang didn't dare to really hurt him. This punch only used 50% of his strength. In his opinion, even with 50% of his strength, it wasn't something that Tai Ta, who hadn't even advanced to the Saint Realm, could withstand. Chapter 30. Bang! Tai Ta and Cheng Mingxiang's fist collided with a muffled sound. Their fists separated as soon as they came into contact, and the strong recoil caused both of them to quickly retreat. Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly when he sensed the power in Tai Ta's punch. He looked at Tai Ta in surprise. Although Tai Ta was not a saint, even a saint would not be able to unleash the power in that punch. If it weren't for the fact that Cheng Mingxiang was so much stronger than Tai Ta, he would have been at a disadvantage in that clash. But even so, Cheng Mingxiang's entire right arm was aching faintly. Cheng Mingxiang moved his right arm slightly. Now, his gaze toward Tai Ta had changed a little. He thought to himself, the principal's disciple is really not simple. The power contained in his punch is actually so terrifying. It completely suppressed my punch with 50% of my strength. If it were an ordinary saint, he would probably be at a disadvantage in the face of Tai Ta's punch. Tai Ta was born with divine strength. His strength was unbelievably great. No one of his peers dared to compare with him. Apart from that, Tai Ta's body was also terrifyingly strong. Even Jianqin was amazed. Tai Ta was not injured at all in the clash with Cheng Mingxiang. Tai Ta laughed excitedly and roared, "Come again. Have a good fight with me." With that, Tai Ta raised his fist and charged toward Cheng Mingxiang again. Cheng Mingxiang frowned slightly when he saw Tai Ta charging toward him again. He then signaled to Luo Jian and said in a low voice, "Tai Ta, I'll deal with Tai Ta. I'll keep Tai Ta busy. Go teach Changyang Shangtian a lesson." With that, Cheng Mingxiang charged at Tai Ta and began an intense battle with him. Because of Tai Ta's special status, Cheng Mingxiang did not dare to use his saint weapon. He directly used his fists to fight Tai Ta. However, after a few rounds, Cheng Mingxiang began to complain in his heart. Tai Ta's strength was just too abnormal. His body was as hard as steel. Without using his saint weapon, fighting Tai Ta was like fighting a moving steel fortress. The strength of his body and that terrifying strength had completely made up for Tai Ta's lack of saint force. Although Cheng Mingxiang's saint force was much stronger than Tai Ta's, without using his saint weapon, he could not do anything to Tai Ta. Towards the end, he gradually began to use his full strength. Even so, he could only barely suppress Tai Ta. Moreover, he did not dare to clash with Tai Ta's fists for too long. Seeing Tai Ta fighting with Cheng Mingxiang so intensely, some of the students in the library who knew Cheng Mingxiang's identity opened their eyes wide in disbelief. Although many of them had never seen Tai Ta before, many of them had heard of his name. After all, Tai Ta had obtained second place in the new student competition. Although he was not very famous in the academy, there were many people who knew his name. It was really hard for them to imagine that a new student who had not yet advanced to the Saint Realm actually had such powerful strength. He was actually evenly matched with Cheng Mingxiang, who had already advanced to the Saint Realm and was known as a cultivation genius in Kargath Academy. The news that the champion of the freshman competition, Changyang Shangtian, was able to defeat Ka Diyun, who had just broken through to the Saint Realm, with just 80% of a saint force, was shocking enough. But now Tai Ta, who had clearly not broken through to the Saint Realm, was actually able to fight to a draw with Cheng Mingxiang, one of the top experts in Kargath Academy. To them, this news was absolutely unacceptable. While Cheng Mingxiang and Tai Ta were fighting intensely, Luo Jian was not idle either. He rushed towards Genshin. Luo Jian did not use his saint weapon. With his strength as an intermediate saint, he disdained to use his saint weapon against someone who had not yet become a saint. Luo Jian quickly rushed in front of Genshin. Without giving Genshin time to prepare, he quickly kicked out with his right leg towards Genshin's stomach. Luo Jian's kick was fast and ruthless. He did not hold back at all. He did not care about Genshin at all. Although Luo Jian's kick was very fast, he still underestimated Genshin's reflexes and dodging speed. Just as Luo Jian's kick was about to hit Genshin's body, Genshin moved slightly to the side. Luo Jian's leg brushed past Genshin's clothes. Although Genshin seemed to have dodged Luo Jian's attack by a hair's breadth, there was no trace of panic on his face. He was completely calm. Seeing that his attack had missed, a trace of surprise appeared in Luo Jian's eyes. However, in the next moment, Azure Saint Force immediately surged out of his body. As soon as the Azure Saint Force appeared, a faint breeze mysteriously appeared around Luo Jian's body. Genshin was surprised when he sensed the breeze that had suddenly appeared around Luo Jian. According to what he had read in the books, this phenomenon was clearly the manifestation of wind-attributed Saint Force. Saint Force with an attribute was usually much more powerful than Saint Force without an attribute. Moreover, there would be additional abilities contained within the attribute depending on the attribute. People with wind-attributed Saint Force were definitely much faster. It was very difficult for people with the same level of strength to surpass people with wind-attributed Saint Force in terms of speed. As soon as the Azure Saint Force appeared, Luo Jian's right fist was wrapped in Azure Saint Force and struck towards Genshin's face at an extremely fast speed. This punch was extremely fast. Wherever it passed, it was like a phantom. It was impossible for the naked eye to catch it. Genshin had a serious expression on his face. He tilted his head slightly and dodged Luo Jian's punch. Following that, he suddenly kicked out with his right leg, kicking towards Luo Jian's body with a speed that was not much slower than Luo Jian's punch. Luo Jian's eyes flashed. Genshin's reaction speed was much faster than he had imagined. At this moment, he did not have enough time to withdraw his right hand. Facing Genshin's kick that was not any slower than his own, Luo Jian had no time to dodge. Without any other choice, he quickly gathered wind-attributed Saint Force in his left hand. Then, with a violent surge of Saint Force, he sent a punch towards Genshin's kick with an unstoppable momentum. Luo Jian's punch that was filled with powerful Saint Force collided with Genshin's kick. The powerful force of the punch directly sent Genshin, whose Saint Force was much weaker, flying. Genshin's body quickly slid backwards. His feet rubbed against the ground, leaving behind 2 extremely clear marks. After retreating nearly 10 meters, Genshin finally neutralized the powerful force. From his expression, Genshin did not seem to have suffered much damage. Luo Jian casually rubbed his left hand. He looked at Genshin with a rare, serious expression. After the short exchange, he already understood that he could not judge Genshin as an ordinary person. Although Genshin had not reached the Saint Realm, his battle prowess had definitely reached the Saint Realm. Luo Jian's eyes flickered with uncertainty. After hesitating for a while, he finally made up his mind. Based on the current situation, if he wanted to defeat Genshin as quickly as possible, he could only use his saint weapon. Although this would inevitably make others laugh at him, he understood that if he did not use his saint weapon, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Genshin in a short period of time. If he had to spend a lot of time dealing with a new student who had not even reached the Saint Realm, it would have an even greater impact on his reputation. Luo Jian could not help but feel vexed when he thought about how he needed to use his saint weapon to deal with someone who had not even reached the Saint Realm. This made his hatred for Genshin deepen even more. Regardless of the outcome of today's battle, he would lose a great deal of face. On the other hand, Genshin's reputation would probably soar because of today's battle, spreading through the entire Kargath Academy once again. Luo Jian's eyes flickered with a chilling light. No one dared to look at his sharp gaze. Powerful Azure Saint Force crazily surged out from his hand, gradually condensing into a huge azure sword. The huge sword was 5 feet long and 3 inches wide. The entire sword was wrapped in a hazy azure light. The sharp edge of the sword reflected a dazzling light under the sunlight, causing people to tremble in fear. Sensing the powerful saint force radiating from the huge azure sword in Luo Jian's hand, Genshin's face gradually became serious. With a saint weapon in hand, Luo Jian's strength had increased by several times. If Luo Jian did not use his saint weapon, Genshin would still be able to barely deal with him. However, once he used his saint weapon, Genshin would have to carefully and cautiously face the battle. With his rich battle experience from his previous life, he might be able to remain undefeated under Luo Jian's attacks, but it would be extremely difficult for him to win. With a saint weapon in hand, Luo Jian's aura suddenly soared. He stared sharply at the solemn Genshin and said in a deep voice, "Changyang Shoten, I'll definitely cripple you today." Saying that, Luo Jian raised his huge azure sword high up. The entire sword shone with an azure light, and powerful saint force undulations caused the students who were hiding in the library to tremble. "Ah!" Luo Jian roared. The huge azure sword that was raised high above his head left behind a beautiful azure trail in the air. It suddenly slashed down at an extremely fast speed. A powerful azure sword, Qi, left the sword and shot towards Genshin with lightning speed. Feeling the power of this sword Qi, Genshin's face immediately became incomparably serious. It was definitely not something he could block with his current strength. The speed of the azure sword Qi was extremely fast, so fast that it was inconceivable. Genshin did not even have time to think. All of the strength in his body was concentrated on his legs. Just as he was about to use all of his strength to dodge, suddenly a white shadow shot out from outside the field at an even faster speed than the azure sword Qi, blocking in front of Genshin. When the azure sword Qi hit the white shadow, it actually disappeared without a trace. It did not even cause a single spark. The white shadow that had just arrived was a middle-aged man around 40 years old. The middle-aged man was wearing a white robe. His scholarly face was currently filled with seriousness. His ordinary eyes were filled with anger. When Luo Jian saw the middle-aged man wearing a white robe, his face suddenly changed and became slightly pale. The huge azure sword in his hand disappeared in an instant. He immediately bowed and respectfully greeted, "Vice Principal." These 3 short words revealed the faint fear in Luo Jian's voice. Chapter 31. Baien's sharp gaze paused on Luo Jian for a while before he coldly snorted. His gaze then turned to Tai Ta and Cheng Mingxiang, who were fighting fiercely. He shouted in a deep voice, "Why aren't you stopping?" Baien's voice was like a thunderclap that exploded in their ears, causing them to temporarily lose their sense of hearing. Tai Ta and Cheng Mingxiang stopped at the same time. When they saw Vice Principal Baien suddenly appear in the field, Tai Ta immediately beamed with joy and excitement, while Cheng Mingxiang's expression changed slightly and became a little unsightly. Tai Ta came to Genshin's side and carefully sized up Genshin from head to toe. He asked in a low, muffled voice, "Changyang Shoten, are you hurt?" Genshin gently shook his head and gave Tai Ta a look, telling him not to speak. Tai Ta chuckled. Although he looked silly, he could understand Genshin's meaning at this time. He simply stopped talking nonsense and stood obediently by Genshin's side without saying a word. However, he kept winking at Cheng Mingxiang, who had an unsightly expression on his face. His expression was full of provocation. It was obvious that the battle just now had not satisfied Tai Ta completely. Vice Principal, by unsharp gaze, stared at Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang. He said in a deep voice, "Luo Jian, You have violated the academy's rules. You are guilty." Luo Jian indignantly raised his head and said, "Vice Principal, it is a very normal thing for students to exchange pointers. I was only exchanging pointers with student Changyang Shoten. How is that a crime? As for violating the academy's rules, please tell me clearly where I have violated the academy's rules." "Humph, you still dare to quibble." The vice principal's face darkened, and he said in a deep voice, "Luo Jian, what is the 66th rule of our Kargath Academy?" Hearing this, Luo Jian bowed his head and thought for a moment. After a while, he said, "The 66th rule is that fighting and destroying everything in the library are prohibited." Vice Principal Bai En sneered and said, "If I hadn't blocked that sword chi just now, I'm afraid that the gate of the Academy's library would have been destroyed by you. Luo Jian, don't you know that you are guilty?" Hearing this, Luo Jian's face suddenly changed. Vice Principal Bai En was right. If Jianchen had successfully dodged the sword chi just now, the gate of the library would have been destroyed, and even the students who were watching the fun would have been injured. As for the situation where Jianchen was unable to dodge the sword chi, Luo Jian did not dare to say it out loud. If he did, he would probably be charged with an even greater crime. This was because there was a clear rule in the academy that students could spar with each other, but if they intentionally injured others, they would be punished. Moreover, he had actually used a saint weapon to deal with a freshman who was not even a saint. Moreover, he had used a saint weapon and used almost all his strength to send out a powerful sword chi. This was no longer a simple matter of intentionally injuring others. Although he had already known the consequences of doing so, he had enough reasons to get away with it. However, at this moment he was unexpectedly caught by the vice principal. The development of the matter was completely beyond his expectations. Now Luo Jian could only pray that the vice principal would not put a bigger crime on him. Luo Jian is guilty. Luo Jian didn't dare to be arrogant in front of the vice principal. Vice Principal Bai En snorted coldly and continued, "Luo Jian, now that you have violated the rules of the academy, I'll punish you to face the wall in the meditation hall for a month. Do you have any objections?" The meditation hall was the place where Kargath Academy punished students who had made mistakes. Although it was called a hall, it was actually just a small stone house built entirely out of stone. Unlike the dormitory, this stone house was extremely small and could only accommodate one person. Once the door was closed, the interior would be plunged into complete darkness. No matter how strong the light from the outside was, it would not be able to penetrate the completely sealed stone house. Once the heavy stone door was closed, the interior would be plunged into a deathly stillness. Even if the sky was filled with thunderstorms, one would not be able to feel it at all. Luo Jian is wholeheartedly convinced. "I have no objections." Luo Jian lowered his head and said respectfully. No one noticed that at this moment, Luo Jian's eyes were full of resentment. He was getting more and more resentful towards Jianchen in his heart. Vice Principal Bai En nodded slightly, his expression becoming a bit better. "After we leave, you can go to the meditation hall to face the wall and reflect." Subsequently, Vice Principal Bai En's gaze fell on Cheng Mingxiang, who had an uneasy expression on his face. He said solemnly, "Cheng Mingxiang, with your strength, you actually went to bully a new student. You've brought shame to our Kargath Academy." Cheng Mingxiang's face was expressionless as he said in a low voice, "Vice Principal's lecture is correct. Mingxiang knows his wrongs. There definitely won't be a next time. Cheng Mingxiang, I hope you remember that this is Kargath Academy and not your Huayan sect. As long as you are in Kargath Academy, you will have to abide by the rules of Kargath Academy. Otherwise, even if you are the Huayan sect's junior sect master, you will still be severely punished. I hope you won't have a next time. You can leave now." The vice principal was clearly somewhat afraid of Cheng Mingxiang and didn't dare to go too far. Cheng Mingxiang didn't say a word and silently left with the few students that had followed him. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, Luo Yun Chinfeng and Carl also didn't continue to stay and left with their tails between their legs. After they left, Vice Principal Bai En's gaze fell on Jianqin, and he said with a smile, "You must be Changyang Shoten." Jianqin nodded and said in a neither haughty nor humble tone, "That is me." Vice Principal Bai En carefully sized up Changyang Shoten. The solemn expression on his face had long since disappeared. He smiled and said, "With strength that hasn't even reached the Saint Realm, you were actually able to force Luo Jindu to use his Saint weapon. Changyang Shoten, you are very good. Vice Principal, you praise me too much. I was just lucky for a moment." Jianqin indifferently replied, not revealing the slightest trace of arrogance on his face. Looking at Jianqin's calm expression, Vice Principal Bai En nodded in admiration and said, "Changyang Shoten, cultivate well and strive to become a saint as soon as possible." "Thank you for your concern, Vice Principal. I will definitely work hard to cultivate." Jianqin smiled. Bai En then turned his gaze to Tai Ta and said, "Tai Ta, although you have become the principal's disciple and your status is different from before, you must remember that only by increasing your strength will you truly be respected by others. Only then will you be able to stand firm on the Tianyuan continent. Do you understand?" Tai Ta nodded obediently and said in a low, muffled voice, "Tai Ta understands." "Good." The vice president nodded and continued, "Although your innate talent is top-notch and your future achievements are limitless, but you must not be arrogant. You must face everything with an ordinary and calm heart. Remember, you must not learn from those hedonistic sons of aristocratic families. Now that you have become the vice president's disciple, you must work harder in your cultivation in the future. You must spend more time on your cultivation. You must not disappoint the vice president's painstaking efforts." Hearing that, Tai Ta patted his chest and promised Bai En, "Vice Principal, don't worry. Tai Ta will definitely work hard on his cultivation. I definitely won't embarrass Master." The vice principal nodded with a smile before leaving. After the vice principal left, Jianqin and Tai Ta chatted for a while longer before bidding each other farewell. He returned to the library to read his books. When Jianqin returned to the library, all the students who were originally reading in the library had already disappeared without a trace. Not long after, two sensational pieces of news spread through the entire Kargath Academy at an inconceivable speed. Tai Ta, who obtained second place in the freshman competition, actually became the principal's disciple. He even had a fierce battle with Cheng Mingxiang, who was known as a cultivation genius in the academy. In the freshman competition, the king of freshmen, Changyang Shoten, fought Luo Jian, who had the strength of an intermediate saint. He forced Luo Jian to use his holy weapon to fight with him. In the end, Vice Principal Bai En was alarmed and was punished to face the wall for a month. These two pieces of news spread to every corner of the Kargath Academy in just a few hours, causing all the teachers and students to be shocked. At the same time, Tai Ta also became a famous person in the Kargath Academy. Originally, he was only a commoner, but now his status had undergone an earth-shattering change. Those aristocratic disciples who looked down on his background before had no choice but to change their expression when facing Tai Ta. At the same time, Tai Ta had become the target of all the disciples in the academy. Although Jianqin's reputation had also spread throughout the entire academy, it had been completely overshadowed by Tai Ta's extremely dazzling radiance. Regarding this, Jianqin did not mind at all. Even so, there were still many female students who cast their bright and infatuated gazes on Jianqin. Jianqin's appearance was extremely handsome, definitely not inferior to any male student in the Kargath Academy. Coupled with his unique aura and powerful strength, he was definitely a lady killer. Therefore, in the Kargath Academy, Jianqin had already become the Prince Charming in the hearts of many young girls. Ever since the battle in the library, Jianqin's days had not been peaceful. Every time he appeared in the academy, there would always be many male students who would use various reasons as an excuse to challenge him. Even when Jianqin went to the library to read, there would be many people who would harass him, causing him to not even be able to read in peace. For this reason, Jianqin had made a few moves and taught a few self-righteous and arrogant, hedonistic disciples a lesson. However, perhaps because Jianqin was too lenient, the deterrent effect was negligible and could almost be ignored. In the end, Jianqin had no choice but to bring the book to the dormitory to read after getting the agreement from the vice principal. Apart from reading, Jianqin spent all his free time on cultivation. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, 3 months had already passed. Early in the morning, when the sun slowly rose into the sky, Jianqin, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, finally opened his eyes slowly. The moment he opened his eyes, 2 rays of light flashed through his eyes. Jianqin slightly lowered his head and slowly opened his palm, only to see that his palm was completely empty. The Class 3 monster core that was originally in his hand had already completely disappeared. Feeling the powerful saint force that was surging like the Yangtze River in his body, Jianqin's face finally revealed a trace of a smile. Saint force at the peak of the 10th layer. Chapter 32. Jianqin looked at the sky outside the window. The sun was already high up in the sky, and it was getting late. Today was a special day for Kargath Academy, because today Kargath Academy would be holding a large-scale activity. All the teachers and students of the academy had to participate, and the activity was called Wilderness Survival Battle. All the students had to go to a small forest 20 miles away from Kargath Academy and stay there for 3 days. Students who had yet to reach the Saint Realm had to obtain at least 2 rank 1 monster cores in these 3 days to pass the test, and students who had reached the Saint Realm had to obtain at least 2 rank 2 monster cores in order to pass the test. There was no limit to the number of monster cores that could be handed in, but the student who handed in the most monster cores would receive a very rich reward, a rank for Earth Monster Core, and a spatial ring. Even in the eyes of the rich children of large clans, such a rich reward was enough to move them. At the same time, all the students who passed would be able to read various books on battle skills and cultivation methods on the 4th floor of the library. This reward was even more attractive to the students who came from ordinary families. Battle skills were battle skills that could unleash powerful attacks. Through the unique use of Saint Force, one could unleash 120% of one's strength, or even unleash powerful attacks that completely exceeded one's own strength. Cultivation methods could only be used by saints. Some commoner families did not even have the lowest level of cultivation methods. The children of commoner families basically relied on the most shallow breathing method to cultivate Saint Force. This breathing method was spread to every corner of the continent, and its contents were extremely simple. Almost every commoner knew its contents. The only flaw was that this breathing method could only allow one to cultivate Saint Force to the 10th layer. It was completely useless to those who had already reached the Saint Realm. Therefore, in the eyes of those students who were born in commoner families, a combat skill and cultivation method was already a rare treasure. On the Tianyuan continent, all battle skills and cultivation methods were divided into 4 grades, which were the Saint tier, Heaven tier, Earth tier, and Human tier. Each grade was further divided into elementary, intermediate, and advanced grades. After leaving the dormitory, Jianqin headed straight for the field. The activity this time had been announced 3 days ago. After 3 days, almost all the students had finished their preparations and adjusted their strength to their peak. When Jianqin arrived at the field, it was already filled with people. However, it was very clear that they were divided into 2 camps. One camp was made up of all the rich children, while the other camp was made up of commoners without any background. All the students who had not reached the Saint Realm held a weapon that shone with a cold light in their hands. Because they were going to fight against the magical beasts, the academy allowed them to choose a defensive weapon of their own. Jianqin went straight to the weapon rack, but when he saw the few remaining weapons, He could not help but frown slightly. Almost all the good weapons had been chosen by the students in front of him. The remaining weapons were either inferior or heavy weapons that required brute force to wield. They were not suitable for him at all. His gaze slowly swept across the weapon rack. When Jianqin found a broken iron rod that was as thick as a finger, his eyes suddenly lit up. He immediately reached out and pulled it out with difficulty. The iron rod was about 1 meter long and as thick as a finger. It was covered in brownish-yellow rust and had a very sharp tip on one end. Jianchen weighed the rusty iron rod in his hand and then tested its hardness. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. Although it was inconvenient to hold the iron rod, its weight and length were just right for Jianchen to use. Among the remaining weapons, this iron rod was undoubtedly the only one that could allow Jianchen to exert as much of his strength as possible. At this moment, Tai Ta walked out of the crowd. He was carrying a huge axe that was slightly larger than his body on his back. He looked even more majestic now. Tai Ta walked up to Jianchen. When his gaze fell on the rusty iron rod in Jianchen's hand, he could not help but show a trace of doubt in his eyes. He asked in confusion, "Hey, Chongyang Shoten, what are you doing with this iron rod?" Jianchen chuckled. "What else can it be? Obviously, it's a weapon." "No way, Chongyang Shoten, you're actually using this broken iron rod as a weapon? Is there something wrong with your head?" Tai Ta was shocked. Jianchen gently chuckled and did not explain any further. Although Tai Ta was very confused by Jianchen's use of a broken iron rod as a weapon, he did not dwell on the matter. He continued, "Chongyang Shoten, why don't we fight together? If we work together, there won't be a single class 1 magical beast that can threaten us. We can even kill class 2 magical beasts that are stronger than us. Moreover, I've been fighting with wild beasts in the forest since I was young, so I've gradually gained some experience in surviving in the wild. You'll definitely suffer a lot less if you're with me." With that, Jianchen pondered slightly before nodding in agreement to Tai Ta's suggestion. The academy did not forbid students from gathering in groups of 3 or 5 to hunt magical beasts, so most students were allowed to travel in groups of 3 or 5. At this moment, a handsome and arrogant rich man arrived before Tai Ta. He smiled and said, "Hello, Tai Ta, I'm Sumis at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. Why don't we work together? I believe that if we work together, it'll be easier for us to kill magical beasts." Tai Ta glanced at Sumis before shaking his head. "No need. Chongyang Shoten and I are enough. We don't need anyone else." Sumis was not discouraged at all by Tai Ta's rejection. He turned to Jianchen and immediately became rather arrogant. He said, "You must be Chongyang Shoten, the 4th young master of Chongyang Prefecture in Lore City. You really are a talent. Chongyang Shoten, I'm from the Sumis clan in the Forbidden City. My father is the patriarch of the Sumis clan. May I ask if Junior Chongyang Shoten would be happy to have me join your group?" Although Sumis's words could be considered polite, his tone faintly carried a hint of coercion. The Forbidden City was a royal city, but for the kingdom of Jessen, the Forbidden City was an imperial city because the royal palace was located in the Forbidden City. Hearing Sumi's threatening tone, Jianchen frowned. He glanced at Sumi's handsome face and said indifferently, "I'm sorry, but we don't need anyone to join us. After all, we're facing a rank 1 magical beast. We don't have the time to take care of others." Hearing this, Sumi's face turned dark. Jianchen's words clearly showed that he looked down on his strength. Sumi's face was gloomy. He glared fiercely at Jianchen's calm face, then snorted coldly and left. After Sumi's left, many people with extraordinary identities came one after another. These people either greeted Tai Ta or wanted to join Tai Ta's team. However, they were all rejected by Tai Ta. Tai Ta didn't have a good impression of these people and didn't want to say a word to them. After everyone left, a burly young man, not much smaller than Tai Ta, walked over from the distance with 3 students in their 20s. They arrived in front of Jianchen and patted Jianchen's shoulder. He laughed and said, "Fourth brother, you're now famous in the academy. In our Kargath Academy. There's probably no one who doesn't know your name. Not bad, not bad. You didn't lose face for our Changyang prefecture, and let Big Brother share a lot of glory with you." The burly young man was Jianchen's big brother, Changyang Hu. At this moment, Changyang Hu's face was filled with a happy smile. That excitement came from the bottom of his heart. A smile appeared on Jianchen's face. "Big brother, don't make fun of me. Right, you came at the right time. Why don't we travel together this time?" Changyang Hu shook his head. He seemed to have thought of something and smiled happily. "Fourth brother, if you said this to me 7 days ago, I might have been happy to go with you. But now I can't. 7 days ago, I finally condensed a saint weapon and became a saint. This time we're going to enter the 3rd level of the forest to hunt class 2 magical beasts, so I can't go with you." As he spoke, powerful saint force surged out of Changyang Hu's body. With a flash of yellow light, a huge double-edged axe appeared in Changyang Hu's hand. The axe was extremely large, even larger than a wash basin. The entire axe shined with a yellow light. "Fourth brother, not bad, right?" After condensing a saint weapon, I was pleasantly surprised to find that my saint force was actually of the earth attribute. Changyang, who was very proud of himself. A battle between a saint weapon with an elemental attribute and a saint weapon without an elemental attribute would usually result in an extremely large advantage. If 2 people of similar strength were to fight, the person with the elemental attribute would almost always be the final victor if nothing unexpected happened. Everyone could only discover the attribute of saint force after condensing a saint weapon. As a result, it was very difficult to discover the attribute of saint force before becoming a saint. However, the chances of having saint force with an attribute were extremely low. On average, only 1 in 1,000 people would have a saint weapon with an attribute. Kargath Academy was basically filled with the students with the most potential in the entire kingdom of Jessen, so it was very normal for there to be many students with an attribute of saint force. Looking at the double-edged axe in Changyang Hu's hand, Jianchen couldn't help but smile happily. "Big brother, congratulations on condensing a saint weapon and becoming a saint weapon with an attribute." Changyang Hu was extremely happy. He extended his hand and pointed at the young men who had come with him. "Oh, right, fourth brother, let me introduce you. They're the more outstanding ones among my direct descendants. They're Changyang Aojian, Changyang Feng, and Changyang Shaotian. We greet the 4th young master." The 3 young men all bowed towards Jianchen. They were extremely respectful. The hierarchy in Changyang Prefecture was extremely strict, so even though they were direct descendants of Changyang Prefecture, their status was slightly lower than Jianchen's. Even though many of them were older than Jianchen, they still treated Jianchen with respect. Moreover, the 3 of them didn't feel the slightest bit of injustice towards Jianchen, who was slightly younger than them. Instead, they were filled with pride. This was because Jianchen had used only 80% of his saint force to defeat Saint Kadiun, who didn't use a saint weapon. It was the same as when he fought Luo Jian empty-handed a few months ago. In the end, he even forced Luo Jian to use his saint weapon. Jianchen's achievements caused all the teachers and students in Kargath Academy to sigh in admiration. Chapter 33. After introducing Ta to Changyang Hu, Jianchen began to chat with Changyang Hu. Only when Vice Principal by N arrived did they part. Vice Principal by N then gave a speech and cleaned up all the students, temporarily taking away their space belts and space rings to prevent some people from using the magic cores in their space rings to make up the numbers. Afterwards, he gave all the students a space belt of the lowest grade. These space belts were not worth much on the Tianyuan continent. They were very common items, which was why the Academy could take out over 1,000 of them at once. The space in each space belt was very small, only 1 meter square. However, it was enough to store monster cores. Inside each space belt, there were some healing medicines. When everything was ready, the 1,000+ students began to leave Kargath Academy in a grandiose manner. They walked towards a forest 20 miles away, accompanied by dozens of academy teachers. Their mission was to spread out in the forest and be ready to rescue any students in danger at any time. The one leading the team was the vice principal by N. After leaving the academy, everyone gradually increased their speed. After all, even the weakest among them had reached 80% of Saint Force. Even though they did not travel at full speed, their speed was still very fast. After 2 hours of travel, everyone finally arrived at the outskirts of the forest. When they arrived, everyone could clearly see that the entire forest was enveloped by a layer of faint white light. Jian Chen's eyes were filled with curiosity as he looked at the forest shrouded in a layer of white light. He had read a large amount of books in the library, so he was very clear about the origins of this forest. 300 years ago, this place was a wasteland filled with weeds. There was no such forest at all. Later on, the principal of Kargath Academy mobilized the strength of thousands of people and spent an entire year to develop this place. In the end, this forest was not very large. Even so, this forest still covered an area of 50 kilometers. After more than 100 years of development, this forest gradually turned into a primeval forest. When the forest was fully formed, the dean of Kargath Academy, Bunain, personally took action. He spent 3 days and 3 nights to lay down a huge enchantment that enveloped the entire forest. Moreover, he divided the forest into 3 regions. Each region was covered by a layer of powerful enchantment. Finally, he released some magic beasts with low attack power but strong reproductive ability to enter. This was to be used by the students of the academy to gain experience. In order to nurture more talents for the Jesson Kingdom, Headmaster Bernine had spent a great deal of effort. However, at that time, Headmaster Bernine was someone else and not the current headmaster of Kargath Institute. At this moment, the calm voice of the vice principal rang out from the front. "Students, from now on, you must stay in the forest for 3 days and hand over at least 2 monster cores to pass. If you leave the forest midway or fail to hand over 2 monster cores, you will fail and will not receive any rewards." The vice principal's voice rang out clearly in the ears of every student present. "Now everyone will split up. Students who have yet to reach Saint Realm can work together to hunt magical beasts in the 2nd region. Students who have reached Saint Realm, please head to the 3rd region." Afterward, everyone gradually split up. Changyang Shoten and Tai Ta walked together very naturally. Since the barrier only targeted magical beasts, they were not stopped at all when they entered the barrier. Jianchen and Tai Ta arrived in the 1st region after entering the barrier. The magical beasts in this region were not very powerful. They had not reached Class 1 yet. These magical beasts were usually called wild beasts on the Tianyuan continent because they could only be called magical beasts after reaching Class 1. With over 1,000 students walking together, even a few particularly ferocious beasts did not dare to cause trouble. As a result, it was extremely peaceful along the way. Very soon, they passed through another barrier and arrived in the 2nd region. All the magical beasts in this region were Class 1 magical beasts. To people who had not even reached Saint Realm, even Class 1 magical beasts with low attack power were enough to pose a threat to them. After entering the 2nd region, Jianchan and Taita took the initiative to separate from the group. They made their way into the depths of the dense forest. The surroundings were filled with weeds that were as tall as a person, which greatly affected their vision. They were unable to make out the path at all. There were only traces left behind by many large magical beasts on the ground. Changyang Shoten, we can come across magical beasts at any time. We need to be careful. We can't be careless, Taita said rather sternly. He had fought with wild beasts in the forest since he was young, so he was extremely experienced. He understood very well just how dangerous the forest was. As long as he was careless, he could lose his life here. Jianqin revealed a sliver of confidence. He said indifferently, "Don't worry. Even if you come across danger, I might not be in danger. With the memories from his past life, Jianqin could not be treated like a normal person. He had lived in primitive forests many times in his past life, so it could be said that Jianqin's experience in surviving in the forest was much greater than Taita's. Moreover, he had read a large number of books in the library. Many of them were experiences of surviving in the forest of magical beasts. Taita tightened his grip on the huge axe in his hand. He looked around cautiously and said, "I've killed many wild beasts in the past, but I've never killed a Class 1 magical beast. Those are powerful magical beasts that have reached the level of saint. Even saints with saint weapons might not be able to kill them. I wonder if we can kill a Class 1 magical beast if we come across one. After all, those magical beasts will run away. We definitely won't be able to catch up here." Jianqin gently smiled. "Tai-ta, do you have so little confidence in your own strength?" Tai-ta blushed slightly. He scratched his head and said honestly, "No, I'm very confident in my own strength. My teacher said that I can defeat regular saints with my current strength, but I've never killed a Class 1 magical beast before. I haven't even seen one." As soon as Tai-ta said that, Jianqin's face stiffened slightly. He immediately extended his hand to stop Tai-ta from continuing. Light flickered through his eyes as he looked around in interest. Tai-ta immediately knew that danger was approaching when he noticed Jianqin's sudden seriousness. He immediately became cautious as if he was facing a great enemy. He slowly scanned the dense weeds around him. Jianqin looked around sharply. However, the weeds had grown extremely strong after years of production, completely blocking his vision. As a result, Jianqin was unable to see anything. Jianqin gently gripped the metal rod in his right hand as he slowly closed his eyes. His ears trembled slightly as he listened carefully to the movements around him. After a few seconds, Jianqin suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, a sharp light flashed through his eyes. Afterwards, Jianqin took a step forward. The rusty metal rod in his right hand suddenly stabbed out with lightning-like speed as it shone with a brownish-yellow light. At the same time, a green branch suddenly shot out from the weeds, shooting towards Jianqin as quickly as it could. Jianqin's metal rod collided with the green branch in the air. The branch was immediately obstructed, pausing slightly in the air. The tip of the metal rod had already pierced the branch's body. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that the branch was actually a green, venomous snake. It was as thick as an adult's arm. Just the part of its body that was exposed was 2 meters long. At this moment, a strong gust of wind whistled past Jianqin's ears. Tai-ta swung his huge axe towards the green, venomous snake with an ear-piercing sound. The axe viciously struck the venomous snake's body. The powerful force directly sent it flying far away. It flew for close to 10 meters before falling to the ground with a soft thud. However, there were just too many weeds here. Jianqin and Tai-ta could not even see the snake clearly from 5 meters away, let alone 10 meters. "Chase after it. We can't let it hide." Jianqin understood his situation very well. As soon as he spoke, he quickly chased after the venomous snake. If the venomous snake carefully hid in an environment like this, it would cause a lot of trouble for the two of them. After all, they would brush against countless weeds with every step they took. Moreover, it was very difficult to see what was beneath their feet. It would be very troublesome to guard against a venomous snake that was prepared. Tai-ta did not hesitate at all and quickly chased after Jianqin. When Tai-ta caught up to Jianqin, he saw that Jianqin had already stopped. 3 meters away, the venomous snake raised its head high and stared at the two of them with a pair of cold eyes. Its mouth was constantly spitting out snake apricots. This venomous snake was already 1.5 meters tall when it raised its body. There were 2 wounds on its body that was as thick as an adult's arm. One of them was a deep bloody hole left by Jianqin, and the other was a long wound left by Tai-ta's axe. The wound was cut horizontally across its waist, and the flesh around the wound was cut open. Bright red blood continuously flowed out from the wound. Jianchen stared at the venomous snake cautiously. Even though the snake before him had weaker attacks, it was still a Class 1 magical beast after all. It was no weaker than a saint who had condensed a saint weapon. Tai Ta stared at the snake, sternly as well. The veins on his hands bulged as he gripped his axe tightly, ready to strike as hard as he could at any time. After a short moment of stalemate, Jianchen finally moved. The short distance of 3 meters was almost negligible in his eyes. With a slight sway of his body, Jianchen had already crossed the distance of 2 meters. In an instant he arrived in front of the viper. With an ear-piercing sound, the iron rod in his hand pierced through the air at a speed that was difficult to follow with the naked eye, aiming straight for the viper's heart. The venomous snake let out a hoarse roar. Its body nimbly shifted slightly, dodging the fatal blow. Even so, the rusty iron rod still pierced deeply into its body, penetrating through. The tip of the rod came out from the other side of its body. Hiss! The intense pain made the green venomous snake release a hoarse roar, its mouth wide open. Yaha! Taita was not slow either. He swung his axe with all his might and chopped at the snake's head with all his might. Chapter 34. Looking at the head that flew high up in the air and the body that was still crazily spraying blood, Taita was stunned. He couldn't believe that a first-level magical beast could be killed so easily, because this green poisonous snake didn't require much effort at all. Jianchen slowly pulled out the iron rod that was still stuck in the snake's body and casually wiped the blood that was left on the tip of the iron rod on the surrounding weeds. In fact, the biggest contribution in killing this first-level magical beast was Jianchen. If it wasn't for his lightning-fast sword that pierced the snake's body and gave Mao a huge wound, Taita's axe wouldn't have been able to chop off the snake's head so easily. Taita took back his axe and looked at the snake's body that had lost its head and was constantly twisting. He murmured, "Changyang Shoten, is this really a first-level magical beast? Why is it so weak?" Hearing this, Jianchen chuckled. "Actually, it's not that this magical beast is too weak, but the two of us together are too strong. And this first-level magical beast is enough to bring a lot of trouble to some people who have just advanced to the saint level." Iron Tower chuckled as he wiped the blood off his axe. He then placed the axe on his shoulder and said with a silly smile, "If that's the case, then we can easily kill Class 1 magic beasts here." Hearing this, Jianchen seemed to have thought of something. He couldn't help but reveal a happy smile. "That's right. With our strength, even if we were to encounter a Class 1 magical beast alone, we would still be able to kill it, not to mention if we were to work together. It can be said that there are basically no magical beasts in the second area that can pose a threat to us. After all, the magical beasts here are all raised by the Academy. Their purpose is to train the students' actual combat ability. It's impossible for there to be overly powerful magical beasts, unless..." Speaking to this point, Jianchen paused as a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Taita became excited when he heard Jianchen's words. He said, Unless what? Unless we meet a group of magical beasts. But I don't know if there'll be any here." With that, Jianchen's face gradually became serious. With their strength, they wouldn't have any trouble dealing with a single first-level magical beast. But if they met a group, it would be hard to say. Taita frowned and said, uncertainly, "It shouldn't be possible. I've fought with beasts in the forest for a long time, and I've never met a group of beasts." "That's not necessarily true. I've read many books about magical beasts in the library, and I've discovered that some magical beasts basically all live in groups. They have a very strong sense of unity, and they rarely move alone." As he spoke, Jianchen arrived before the headless snake. Only now did he discover that the snake was actually 6 or 7 meters long. Afterward, Jianchen stabbed his rod into the snake's weak point and removed a blood-soaked crystal. On the Tianyuan continent, There were many different types of magical beasts, and their monster cores were all located in different places. Some were in their heads, some were in their chests, and some were in their stomachs. The monster cores of snake-type magical beasts were located at the 7th inch of their bodies. This was something that Genshin had already learned from books. Bang! Tower swung the axe on his shoulder at a tree beside him, directly chopping the tree that was as thick as a water bucket in half. He yelled out heroically, "If we really encounter a group of magical beasts, I, Lord Tower, will definitely make sure they don't return alive." Genshin picked up the monster core from the snake's body and wiped off the blood on the grass before tossing it to Taita. He said, "All right, stop howling. Although there are quite a few magical beasts that live in groups on the Tianyuan continent, who knows if we'll be able to come across them? After all, this isn't the magical beast forest." Taita then took the monster core that Genshin threw over and asked doubtfully, "Why are you giving it to me?" Genshin smiled. "This snake was killed by you, so this monster core should be yours." Seeing that Taita was about to refuse, Genshin continued, "Don't refuse this monster core, just take it. After all, we still have at least 3 days. During this time, our harvest will be very rich, so we don't care about this monster core." All right then. I'll take this monster core first. No matter which one of us kills the next magical beast, the monster core will be yours. Taita was overjoyed as he held the monster core that still had some traces of blood on it. After all, this was the first monster core he had obtained from killing a magical beast. Afterwards, the two of them continued on their way. Since he knew that Genshin was extremely sensitive to danger, Taita straightforwardly gave the task of being on guard to Genshin. He, on the other hand, constantly swung his axe, clearing the path ahead. Although swinging such a heavy axe was extremely exhausting, it was like eating a normal meal to Taita, who was born with great strength. It did not exhaust him at all. After all, not only was his strength frighteningly great, it was almost limitless. It was almost impossible for him to run out of strength. Not long after the two of them started walking, Genshin's ears twitched slightly, and his footsteps suddenly stopped. He immediately reached out and pulled Taita, who was constantly chopping at the weeds in front of him, and made a silent gesture. Taita understood and stopped chopping at the weeds. He held the axe tightly with both hands and came to Genshin's side, standing side by side with Genshin. His eyes shone brightly as he vigilantly looked around. The two of them breathed very lightly, and their expressions were full of vigilance. The difference was that Taita's eyes were constantly looking around, while Genshin closed his eyes slightly, using his perception to feel everything around him. The weeds were overgrown, so it was very difficult to see anything with one's eyes. Even if there really was an unknown danger hidden here, it was probably not something that could be seen with one's eyes. As a result, Taita did not discover anything even after looking around for quite some time. Genshin gently closed his eyes. His sensitive ears twitched from time to time, capturing all the sounds around him. At the same time, Genshin's mind was also on high alert, using his powerful spirit to sense everything around him. At this moment, Genshin could not help but reminisce about the battle between him and Dugachobai in his previous life. In the end, he made a breakthrough right before his death, reaching the realm of wielding a sword with his spirit. At that time, his spirit had become extremely powerful and could easily spread out, enveloping everything around him. Nothing within the range of his spirit could escape his perception. However, Genshin felt regretful. Although his spirit was extremely powerful after his reincarnation, he was unable to spread it out. Otherwise, this forest would not have been a problem for Genshin at all. It would have been extremely easy for him to find the magical beasts hiding here. Genshin's spirit was highly focused as he tried his best to sense everything around him. Slowly, his mind entered a special state. Although his spirit did not spread out, at this moment his spirit seemed to have established a subtle connection with the various plants around him. It was as if they had merged into one. This feeling was very mysterious. However, when Jianchen entered the state, his perception suddenly reached a new height. Finally, a faint breathing sound entered Jianchen's perception. This breathing was simply too subtle. Even if you were standing next to it, you would probably not be able to sense it. Jianchen's tightly closed eyes opened in an instant. Immediately, his body flashed and disappeared from where he was standing. He quickly rushed to the side. On the way, Jianchen's body constantly twisted and adjusted, avoiding the weeds and branches that blocked his path. In a short moment, Jianchen had already crossed a distance of 10 meters. Then he quickly stabbed the iron rod in his hand. Along the way, the iron rod silently pierced through a few leaves and a few weeds. With lightning speed, he stabbed towards a black shadow hidden in the weeds. Ayo! A scream mixed with pain suddenly sounded. Then, a black shadow jumped out from the grass. It opened its bloody mouth and pounced towards Jianchen. This was a black panther a full 2 meters long. At this moment, there was a finger-sized hole in the black panther's forehead. A torrent of blood continuously flowed out from the wound, slowly flowing down the black fur on its face. It looked even more ferocious. Jianchen's gaze was as sharp as a sword. His indifferent face revealed a trace of a cold smile. Then, with a shake of his arm, he once again stabbed the iron rod in his hand at an inconceivable speed. The target was the Black Panther's throat. In the end, before the Black Panther could react, the tip of the iron rod had already pierced deeply into the Black Panther's throat. Coupled with the fact that the Black Panther's body was in a forward, pouncing posture in midair, its cumbersome body was constantly falling down. In the end, the iron rod pierced through its throat and came out from its spine. This time, the Black Panther did not even have the time to cry out before it died. It collapsed on the ground with its eyes wide open. It had died with remaining grievances. Only at this moment did Tai Ta rush over from behind. When he saw the Black Panther lying on the ground with its throat pierced by the rusty iron rod, his eyes immediately widened. He was as shocked as he could be. Changyang Shoten, WW, did you kill it? Tai Ta asked with a trembling voice. Even though he had seen Jianchen's weapon pierce the Black Panther's throat with his own eyes, he still could not believe what he had just seen. This was because far too little time had passed. When Jianchen had rushed over, Tai Ta had followed as quickly as he could. However, by the time he arrived, a Class 1 magical beast had already died at Jianchen's hands. It had taken less than a breath, not even half a breath. Killing a Class 1 magical beast in less than half a breath was naturally extremely easy for some experts. However, Tai Ta understood Jianchen's strength very well. He definitely had not become a saint yet, and the weapon he used was only a rusty iron rod. Jianchen stepped on the Black Panther's head and slowly pulled out the iron rod. He smiled carelessly and said, "That's right, I killed it. It was just a coincidence. It shouldn't have died so quickly, but it insisted on drilling into my weapon. As a result, it died before it could even cry out." Tai Ta scratched the back of his head when he heard that. He stared at Jianchen's calm face in doubt and asked in disbelief, "Really? You're not lying to me?" Jianchen chuckled. "Of course it's true. Why would I lie to you?" Chapter 35. After retrieving the monster core, Jianchen and Tai Ta continued their journey of hunting magical beasts. Hunting a Class 1 magical beast with the strength of a saint was definitely an extremely difficult mission for regular students of the academy. Their lives could be in danger at any time. However, in the eyes of Jianchen and Tai Ta, it was nothing more than a game. The second zone had completely become a golden ground for the two of them to hunt for monster cores. A day passed very quickly. Night fell. Jianchen and Tai Ta sat in an empty space that had been cleared out. There was a torch between the two of them. The bright light constantly flickered in the dark night, causing their reflections to constantly distort. They seemed like demons, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. The surroundings were pitch black. Outside of the range of the flames, One couldn't even see one's own fingers. The night was not so calm. In the woods, who knew how far away, there are constant roars and howls of magical beasts, making one's hair stand on end. If a timid person were to spend the night in such an environment, he would probably be scared out of his wits. Tai-Ta flipped over a large piece of unknown magical beast meat on the rack. With the light from the fire, he could clearly see that Tai-Ta and Gentian's clothes were all tattered and covered in blood. These bloodstains were all from the magical beasts, and their clothes were all cut by some thorns. Changyang Shoten, you really are amazing. I never thought that your rusty metal rod would be so powerful. You basically killed all the magical beasts we killed today. Only the small snake we met at the beginning was killed by me. Tai-Ta praised. Jianchen smiled faintly. I just happened to grasp the opportunity. If you hadn't heavily injured the magical beasts, it would have been rather difficult for me to kill them. Tai-Ta chuckled. He finally found some comfort in his heart. He continued, Changyang Shoten, can you tell me why you're always able to sense the approach of magical beasts beforehand? Tai-Ta's face was filled with curiosity. He had been holding this question in his heart for an entire day, and now he finally found the right opportunity to ask. Jianchen did not hide anything. He pointed at his ears and head and said, Use this and this. Iron Tower followed Jianchen's actions and pointed at his ears and head. He asked curiously, Are you talking about stopping with your ears and thinking with your head? You're half right. Jianchen rubbed the tip of the iron rod against a large rock that he had purposely moved near his feet. He replied absent-mindedly, Apart from listening with your ears, you also need to use your spirit to sense the surroundings. However, the latter method is still a little too difficult for you right now. Oh. Tai-Ta nodded as if he didn't fully understand. Then a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Jianchen placed the iron rod, which was almost molded, beside him. He untied the spatial belt around his waist and said, Iron Tower, let's look at today's harvest. With that, Jianchen continuously shook the spatial belt and poured out all the monster cores stored inside. As the monster cores rolled out of the spatial belt one after another, they gradually formed a small mountain in front of Jianchen. Iron Tower did the same. He took off his own space belt and poured out all the magic cores inside. In the end, he also piled them up into a small mountain of 1 foot high. I have a total of 48 here. Jianchen wore a satisfied smile on his face. Today's harvest was undoubtedly huge. I have a total of 49 here, one more than you. Tai-Ta's voice was filled with excitement. It was definitely the first time he had seen so many monster cores in his life. In the past, he had never thought that he would actually possess so many monster cores one day, even though they were all at the first level. However, to Tai-Ta, who was born in a commoner family, this was already a huge amount of wealth. To have such a bountiful harvest on the first day, it's not bad. I wonder if we can become the person with the most monster cores with our current number of monster cores. After all, the rewards are very generous. A 4th level monster core and a spatial ring. Jianchen was also moved by the bountiful rewards. Most importantly, it was the 4th level monster core. The energy of a 4th level monster core was much purer than a 1st level monster core. At this time, Jianchen's eyes suddenly narrowed. He shouted in a low voice, Quickly put away the monster cores. Someone is coming. After saying that, Jianchen immediately put the monster cores on the ground into his spatial belt and hung it on his waist. Tai-Ta was not slow either. As soon as he heard Jianchen's reminder, he began to pick up the monster cores on the ground in a flurry. When Jianchen finished, Tai-Ta had also put all the monster cores into his spatial belt. After the two of them stored all the monster cores into their spatial belts, they waited for a few breaths of time before the grass in the distance began to sway slightly. With a rustling sound, a thin person walked out from the grass. When he saw Jianchen and Tai-Ta standing in front of the bonfire, he was clearly stunned. Then he let out a cry filled with joy. Like a weak girl who had grabbed onto a life-saving straw, he ran over with messy steps. I finally found someone. I finally found someone. I beg you to save me. Don't leave me behind. I'm scared. I'm really scared. Those magical beasts want to eat me. That person's tone was very flustered and full of fear, but his voice was very soft. Hearing this, Jianqin and Tai Ta finally understood that this person was actually a girl. With the help of the flickering firelight, they could vaguely see that the girl was wearing Kargath Academy's uniform. However, the uniform had been torn by the thistles and thorns in the forest. It was already a bit of clothing that didn't cover her body. Even her white underwear was exposed. Moreover, her clothes were also covered with mud. It seemed that she had fallen many times. The girl's face was full of mud and couldn't be seen clearly. However, her long cheeks had 2 clear lines of tears. Her pair of watery eyes were full of pleading as she looked at Jianqin. She looked very pitiful and helpless. Sit down first. Jianqin tried his best to make his tone more amiable. With regards to the girl's situation, he already had a good guess. In this kind of environment, even some men who hadn't experienced the hardships would feel their hair stand on end, let alone a girl. Seeing that the other party was actually a delicate girl, Tai Ta also relaxed his vigilance. He gently put down the axe in his hand and looked at the girl with curiosity. Jianqin looked at the girl and asked, "Can you tell me your name?" I'm called Liang Xiaola. The girl answered a little timidly. She looked at Jianqin and Tai Ta evasively. Her eyes were full of fear, as well as some faint worry and fear. "You're a girl. Why aren't you with others? You're so timid, yet you still want to walk alone in the forest. Just a few random roars scared you to this extent?" Tai Ta asked in a low, muffled voice. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta timidly and said in a low voice, "I was originally with a few friends. Unfortunately, we met a magical beast later on. That magical beast was very strong. Even with all of us together, we couldn't beat it. Very quickly, a few of us were injured. In the end, when we were running away, I accidentally got separated from everyone." Hearing this, Tai Ta pouted in disdain and muttered to himself, "A few people can't even deal with a first-rank magical beast. How useless! Changyang Shoten and I killed almost 100 magical beasts today." Thinking of this, a sense of pride spontaneously rose in Tai Ta's heart. Gulyalu. At this moment, a strange sound suddenly sounded. Immediately, Jianqin and Tai Ta's eyes focused on the source of the sound. It was actually Liang Xiaola's stomach. At this moment, her stomach was continuously making Gulyalu sounds. Hungry. Jianqin's face revealed a trace of a smile. Liang Xiaola nodded a little shyly and said in a soft voice, "I haven't eaten for 2 meals." Saying this, Liang Xiaola's eyes kept glancing at the golden magical beast meat on the fire. Her nose greedily sniffed the faint fragrance, but the more she was like this, the more her stomach growled. In the end, Jianqin and Tai Ta heard a rumbling sound in their ears. Jianqin smiled and picked up the stick with the magical beast meat. He was not afraid of the heat and directly tore off a large piece with his hands and placed it in front of Liang Xiaola. He said, "Take it and eat. Be careful, it's hot." Liang Xiaola rubbed her hands together and wiped the dirt off her hands with the corner of her tattered clothes. She carefully took the magical beast meat and ate it in big mouthfuls without caring about the hot meat. Liang Xiaola was probably starving. He quickly ate up such a large piece of magical beast meat and still looked at the remaining large piece of magical beast meat with an unsatisfied expression. Jianqin smiled and tore off another large piece of magical beast meat and placed it in front of Liang Xiaola. He said, "Take it and eat." Looking at the piece of magical beast meat in front of her, Liang Xiaola hesitated for a moment. In the end, she did not reach out to take it. Instead, she looked at Jianqin and Tai Ta and said in a soft voice, "I'm done eating. What are you going to eat?" Hearing this, Tai laughed and said, "Don't worry, we still have a big one. Look under that tree." Tai pointed in a direction. Liang Shaola looked in the direction of Tai's finger and found that there was an unknown magical beast under a big tree not far away. One of its legs had disappeared, and there were still traces of blood on the ground. Looking at the corpse of the magical beast, Liang Shaola swallowed hard and said, "You guys are really amazing. 2 people can kill a level 1 magical beast. Tieska, this is nothing." Taita did not care. Time passed silently. Very soon, Jianchen and Taita had finished eating as well. They were about to rest. "Oi, where am I going to sleep?" Liang Shaola asked awkwardly. Jianchen pointed at the tree nearby and said, "Go rest in the tree. That way, even if magical beasts attack at night, they won't hurt you." "Ah, there are magical beasts attacking at night?" Liang Shaola's face paled when she heard that. Her eyes were filled with fear as she trembled all over. "What about you? Where are you going? Don't leave me behind at all, or I'll definitely be eaten by those vicious magical beasts." Liang Shaola followed up with a question. She stared at Jianchen and Taita nervously, afraid that they would leave her behind and run off. Jianchen sighed inside. He really had no way of dealing with the timid Liang Shaola. Young ladies from noble families like her had never experienced much. They had grown up in a greenhouse, so they would lose their cool when they encountered danger. "Don't worry, we won't go far. We'll just rest under that tree," said Jianchen. Liang Shaola finally felt some comfort when she heard that. However, the lingering fear in her heart did not disappear.